Chapter 345. Tu Su Feng did not bother with him anymore. He waved his sleeves and ordered his men to take him away. Then, he turned around and looked into Hellion Vivian's eyes. He smiled faintly. I hope you don't blame me for using this method to test your reaction. At the same time, you can catch the spy. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Tu Su Feng smiled faintly but did not say anything. At that moment, Hellion Vivian only felt that the person in front of her was the smartest person. He was simply amazing. He was indeed His Highness Uncle. This family was not easy to deal with at all. Only little Seven was a little cuter. Tu Su Feng naturally knew what she was thinking. I thought you had gotten used to it after being with a Jew for so long. Get used to what? Being tricked. Hellion Vivian also smiled. Tu Su Feng glanced at the Xian paper on the table, and then changed the data on it. Only then did he say, your performance has exceeded my expectations. I indeed wanted you to help me lure out the spy. However, when you were sitting here, I was already prepared to come out. Later, you actually changed your cups. In such a short period of time, you were able to detect that there was something wrong with the other party. Moreover, you were able to quickly deal with it, and later on, you didn't even bat an eyelid. Now, you are more qualified than anyone to be a member of the Battle Spirit Forces. As he spoke, Tu Su Feng handed over the banknotes in his hand. This time, Hellion Vivian did not ask for the reward. She only looked up at Tu Su Feng and said in a clear voice, in the past, I lived a muddle-headed life. No wonder people didn't want me to join the Battle Spirit Forces. But now, I am a member of the Battle Spirit Forces. I should be qualified to ask for help from the Battle Spirit Forces. Are you begging me? Tu Su Feng smiled. Hellion Vivian shook her head. Her eyes were clear like jade and indestructible. I am exercising my right as the successor of the He family. Tu Su Feng looked at the girl standing in front of him who was neither servile nor overbearing. It was as if he saw the old man who sat in that position and commanded to kill the enemy. He was not anxious and could control the situation. He was stunned for a moment. Then, he curled his lips and said, what a nice way of saying that I should exercise my rights as the successor of the He family. At this point, Tu Su Feng paused. In a moment, someone will take you to a place. Although I am in charge of the investigation of the Battle Spirit Forces, other people are in charge of the deployment of the army. Who are the others? Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Tu Su Feng gave her an answer that was not a smile. Hey family. Hence, that was why the following scene happened. As soon as Hellion Vivian walked into the Hay family's courtyard, she saw the second young master of the Hay family happily jumping over the wall. The two of them merely glanced at each other, causing the manservant behind them to misunderstand. Young master, how can you not listen to master's words and meet a woman here? It's fine if you meet other people. But now Miss Weiwei is the third princess consort. You have committed a capital crime. He eyes frowned. Listen to me first. Young master. That manservant decisively interrupted him. You don't need to explain. I won't believe you. I'm going to tell master now. Without waiting for anyone to react, that manservant ran away and disappeared without a trace. He eyes. What the fuck is this? Why are you here? He eyes directly jumped down from the wall, not caring about the iron chains tied to his hands. His domineering appearance did not diminish in the slightest. He was only wearing a black nightgown and the slightly open collar was not fastened properly. Under his handsome eyes, the corners of his mouth were curved. His frivolous smile made people feel that he was gentle and at ease. If a woman saw this, she would not be able to reject such a person and such a smile. However, Hellion Vivian also felt wronged. Actually, I'm here to look for old Master Hay. Then why didn't you say so just now? He eyes moved his head closer. Help me remove the rotten grass on my head first. Hellion Vivian naturally would not refuse. Just as she was about to raise her hand, she saw old Master Hay, who was wearing a brocade robe, walking over from not far away. His face was gloomy, and he was holding a dragon-headed crutch in his hand. There was a little displeasure in his eyes when he looked at Hellion Vivian, but he was still polite. Third princess consort, what brings you to my humble abode? Hellion Vivian knew that old Master Hay did not like her. She curled her lips and smiled. To catch up on the old days. Catch up on the old days. Old Master Hay glanced at the moon in the sky. It's so late. Third Princess Consort is here to catch up with my grandson. Does the third prince know? This was to remind Hellion Vivian that she was already married, and her behavior was improper. Hellion Vivian smiled. He doesn't know. But I'm not here to look for he eyes. I'm here to disturb you, Old Master Hay. Me? Old Master Hay glanced at the servant beside him, as if blaming him for not reporting the truth. Then he turned back and looked at Hellion Vivian. Steward Jong, go and get ready. I'll talk with third Princess Consort in the study. Yes. Steward Jong bowed his head and accepted the order. He eyes wanted to follow him. But he was nailed to the ground by old Master Hay's gaze. Add another layer of iron chains for the young master. More. He eye's handsome face instantly darkened by more than half. Hellion Vivian smiled without sympathy and followed old Master Hay into the study. Everyone in the Hay family behaved like a noble family. No matter who came, it was the same. Old Man Hay sat in a wooden chair and blew on the tea that was served by a servant. Then he said, "You came to find me so late at night, and the people following you are Tusu Feng's people. It seems that you are already a member of the Battle Spirit Forces." Hellion Vivian nodded faintly. She held the tea in her hand but did not drink it. There was a smile at the corner of her mouth. Old Master Hay saw that she was so indifferent. He could not help but admire her. The profound world that you and Zier opened is not bad. It's okay in the north, but the operation needs to be strengthened. Hellion Vivian did not exaggerate or belittle herself. Old Master Hay, you are also doing business. You can teach us in the future. We haven't opened the market in the south. Old Master Hay waved his hand. Now it's the world of you young people. Your grandfather and I were like you and Zier. We were always fearless and killed enemies side by side. So he eyes and I can only be brothers, not husband and wife. Hellion Vivian followed his words. Old Master Hay was stunned for a moment and laughed. No wonder your grandfather said that you were smart when you were young. Now it seems that it is true. I'm still not smart enough. The light in Wei Wei's eyes dimmed, but seemed to be brewing a lot of emotions. If I was really smart enough, Mother wouldn't have died, and I wouldn't have been schemed against and driven out of the Defense Division's residence. So much so that even the people in the clan wanted to remove my name. Chapter 346. Old Master Hay's hand paused as he drank the tea. His emotions surged and finally turned into a sigh. Girl, it's been hard on you for so many years. A sword that has been sharpened for 10 years. Hellion Vivian took a sip of tea and said slowly, sometimes, suffering a little can make people sober. The most she had suffered in her life was slaps. In modern times, her stepmother's disgust would always cause her to be beaten for no reason. No one had ever thought of giving her dates to eat, not to mention listening to her grievances. At that time, she liked to hide in the closet to sleep because she felt that it was the safest place. She knew better than anyone that in this world, one could only rely on one's own hands to create one's own empire. It was the same now. She would take revenge on those she hated. She would not blame those who did not help her. Because no one said that they had to help you. Old Master Hay looked at the pair of eyes that were as firm as water and made a decision. I'll take you to the military camp now. If Hellion Vivian saw him and complained about so many years of suffering, he might not accept her immediately, even if he knew about her current achievements. However, the young girl standing in front of old Master Hay was neither anxious nor impatient. She was neither lukewarm nor angry, but she had her own unique arrogance. He really felt sorry for such a child. After all, it was not that he had not heard the rumors in the capital all these years. When he heard that his unfilial grandson was getting close to this girl, he was half happy and half worried. Probably everyone in the world thought that he did not like Hellion Vivian's style. He did not like her, but more than that, he was disappointed that she did not live up to his expectations. He had also thought of simply letting his unfilial grandson marry Wei Wei. At least in the Hay family, he could protect her. But at that time, The old man said before he died that he wanted to see his only granddaughter become a talent. So he protected this girl from behind many times, but he could not protect her too much. Now, all of this was finally worth it. After that, old Master Hay took Hellion Vivian to the back of the mountain. In the fog of the night, no one knew how old Master Hay walked. An extremely secluded valley appeared in front of Hellion Wei. All the animals that passed by the entrance of the valley were scared away by the murderous aura inside. At this time, the unique sound of soldiers training could be faintly heard from the valley. This was where the hidden army of the Hellion clan was hiding. So God was hiding here. No wonder no one could find him. Hellion Vivian looked at the entrance of the valley and raised her eyebrows. This was indeed a good place. However, she didn't expect that as soon as she finished speaking. A soldier's unique sonorous voice rang out, "Halt your steps. This is a restricted area for our army. Unauthorized personnel, please leave quickly. Be careful not to provoke a fatal disaster. It's me. I've brought the descendant of old General Hellion." Old Master Hay stood with his hands behind his back. There was not a trace of emotion on his face, but his voice was deep and powerful. When the soldiers guarding the entrance of the valley heard Old Man Hay's voice, they immediately appeared and knelt on one knee. "Get up." Old Master Hay took the lead and walked forward. The soldiers replied, "Yes." They followed behind Old Master Hay respectfully. However, when they looked at Hellion Vivian again, there was a trace of disdain in their eyes. Hellion Vivian turned a deaf ear to the soldiers' stares and walked into the valley. "Woman, this soldier doesn't like you." Yuan Ming's voice was still very charming. Hellion Wei smiled, her thin lips curved up to reveal a bit of black-bellied flavor. When the two of them entered the valley, they saw many well-built men in plain clothes. They were either practicing alone, in pairs, or in groups. Every one of them was practicing in the school field. It was very lively. Old Master Hay seemed to be saying something to one of the young generals. That young general was wearing a straight military uniform. There was not a single crease on his clean clothes. Under his black hair was an expressionless handsome face. His skin was a sexy bronze color. His lips were very thin and the tip of his nose was very high. A pair of black eyes were like crystals, faintly shining like glass. When he heard Old Master Hay's words, he seemed to look at Hellion Vivian. That kind of gaze had a trace of inquiry, but it was so handsome that it was breathtaking. "I didn't expect that there would be such a beauty in this group of soldiers who are always fighting and killing." The person who spoke was Yuan Ming. Hellion Vivian crossed her arms and smiled faintly. "What? You like him? Lousy likes men." Yuan Ming blurted out in a moment of desperation. Hellion Vivian snorted, "You finally admitted it." Wait a minute. I was wrong." Yuan Ming anxiously wanted to explain. Hellion Vivian directly cut off the telepathic communication with him. Yuan Ming could only scratch at the wall in the fantasy space. Little White glanced at him, and that glance contained countless hee-hees. Two people in the distance were talking. Although it was said to be a conversation, in fact, it was only Old Master Hay talking. And that young general did not say a word from beginning to end, nor did he look at Hellion Vivian a second time. Hellion Vivian was a secret agent, so of course, she knew what this meant. 1. He did not like her. 2. He played a key role in whether she could obtain the hidden army or not. 3. This person must have the same obsession with cleanliness as His Highness. It could be seen from his military uniform that was not stained with a speck of dust. 4. He was very difficult to approach. However, there was one thing that Hellion Vivian did not understand, and that was the way he looked at her seemed to be mixed with too many emotions. Did they know each other before? Before Hellion Vivian could figure it out, she heard a cold laugh. "What right does a piece of trash like you have to be here? Quickly go back and find someone to marry. After you give birth to a child, send it to us for us to raise, and then restore the glory of the Hellion family." The person who spoke was standing next to the young general. He was almost 2 meters tall, and his muscles were bulging, giving people a strong sense of oppression. His standard square face was filled with obvious anger. "Captain Da Xiong is right. Instead of you, you should send a child here. Anyway, You only know how to hang around that Lord Murong. Many of our brothers have died because of you. Do you know that a person like you is not worthy of our lives? Get out of here, you are not welcome here. Waves of resentful insults and chastising voices rose and fell one after another. Hellion Vivian stood tall and looked at Da Xiong in front of her, and then looked at the eyes of the other soldiers. She was not angry. She also understood how disappointed these people would be when they found out that the person they were supposed to be loyal to was a love-struck fool who only knew how to follow behind a man. But whether I am a piece of trash or not, whether I am worth your lives, we will know after a competition, right? Chapter 347. When Hellion Vivian spoke, there wasn't a trace of anger or dissatisfaction in her tone. She lifted her chin slightly, giving off a natural air of indolence. When Da Xiong heard that Hellion Vivian wanted to compete with him, he was so angry that he laughed instead. Since you want to compete, then I'll help old General Hellion teach you a lesson, you good-for-nothing descendant. Compared to Da Xiong, Hellion Vivian was much more polite. She simply said, please. Her indifference naturally aroused the crowd's dissatisfaction. Captain, don't be polite with her. You must teach her a lesson. As the crowd flew into a rage, it was too late for Old Man Hay to stop them. He looked at the young general beside him and said with a sullen face, don't they know that Hellion Vivian is no longer the useless person she used to be? While you were recuperating, the capital had undergone earth-shattering changes. Even if they don't know, Kai Yang, you should know that the armament in your hand was personally made by Hellion Vivian. I know. Kai Yang's tone was indifferent. However, I can't convince the crowd. Hearing this, Old Man Hay frowned. At this moment, Hellion Vivian and Da Xiong had already arrived at a corner of the drill ground. After the two of them stood still, Da Xiong pointed to the weapon rack and said, go and pick your weapon. I'll give you some of my bare hands. Hellion Vivian's mood was not affected by the sneers around her. A trace of an evil smile appeared on her slightly indolent face. No need. I brought my own weapon. Please give me some pointers. Since you're looking for a lesson, I'll fulfill your wish. Da Xiong did not say anything else. His figure flashed, and with an agility that did not match his majestic body, he rushed towards Hellion Vivian. His pair of iron fists created a gust of wind wherever they passed. When Hellion Vivian saw Da Xiong rushing towards her, her beautiful eyes gradually narrowed into slits. However, her posture did not change. She still stood there casually. When Da Xiong's big fist appeared in front of Hellion Vivian bent over and dodged it. Then, she threw an uppercut at Da Xiong's chin. Da Xiong did not expect that this good-for-nothing descendant would be able to dodge his punch. Just as he was feeling shocked, sensing the dangerous aura below his head, he hurriedly tilted his head and barely dodged Hellion Vivian's fist. When Hellion Vivian saw that her attack had failed, she bent down and supported herself with one hand. She kicked Da Xiong's face from behind with her right foot. Da Xiong barely dodged Hellion Vivian's fist in surprise. Before he could stabilize himself, he felt a sharp pain in his forehead. Hellion Vivian had kicked him. Hellion Vivian's kick made Da Xiong stumble backward. While his mind was in a daze, Hellion Vivian followed closely behind. She leaped high into the air, grabbed Da Xiong's head, and hit him hard with her elbow. Bang! Da Xiong, who was full of confidence, was hit by Hellion Vivian and fell to the ground. His ears were buzzing, and he could not get up for a long time. All the soldiers were dumbfounded. They looked at Da Xiong on the ground with disbelief gradually appearing on their faces. Da Xiong shook his head twice and wanted to get up and fight again. At this time, Red Flame, who was in a neat military uniform, walked over. His waist-length black hair fluttered gently in the wind. There was no trace of expression on his cold face. However, he reached out and pressed Da Xiong's hand. His voice was calm, but it was oppressive. If you continue to fight, you will lose. That's not necessarily true. I only used less than 1/5 of my strength. Da Xiong shouted unwillingly. I saw that she was a woman, so I didn't really use my full strength. Kai Yang glanced at Hellion Wei with an indifferent expression. You only know that you've used less than 1/5 of your strength, But didn't you notice that she's wearing weights on her feet and hands? Weights? Da Xiong seemed to be in disbelief. He deliberately glanced at Hellion Vivian. When his eyes came into contact with her wrists, he could not help but be stunned. Did she really wear weights? This woman actually wore 3 heavy buckles and came to compete with him. Moreover, her speed just now was so fast that it did not seem like she was wearing weights at all. Red Flame's voice was cold, but it sounded especially textured in the middle of the night. Not only that, but she also did not release her martial qi. Da Xiong's expression completely froze when he heard this. Wei also didn't conceal her body's martial qi cultivation. Her thin lips slightly curved, one hand spread out, her long sleeves fiercely fluttering. One could only see that the wind surrounding her body seemed to have been manipulated by her, forming a huge current of air, lingering on both sides of her body. And she was just like a queen who controlled the wind under heaven. Her long and narrow eyes carried a smile of her own way, unexpectedly giving birth to a breathtaking feeling on that dark face. How can this girl have such strong martial qi? Not only the surrounding soldiers, but even old Master He himself was shocked and a little excited. It seemed that the reinvigorating of the hidden army and taking back the general's residence was just around the corner. Da Xiong was the closest to Hellion Vivian, so he could see the clearest. If she had raised her martial qi from the beginning, he would not even have had the chance to make a move, let alone talk about winning or losing. After an uproar, there was an unprecedented silence in the drill ground. Hellion Wei looked at the soldiers in front of her. Her attitude was neither anxious nor impatient. I know that all of you were disappointed by my actions in the past, but those were not my original intentions. I was framed, my meridians were broken, and I lost my martial qi. I was muddle-headed all year round, thinking that I was being pampered and raised, but I didn't know that someone was deliberately putting me on a pedestal. Now, I have also changed. Although I can't be gentle, I won't be like before, chasing after someone. Because the only thing I want to do right now is to take back everything that originally belonged to my Hellion family, and this includes your trust. I dare not say that I can make you risk your lives for me like my grandfather, but I promise that even after 100 years, there will be people who will remember our invincible hidden army. Her voice was not loud, but it seemed to penetrate the blood vessels of the people. When the soldiers heard the cause and effect, and saw her strength, they only felt that the blood in their chests was about to surge out. At this moment, they realized. They had been waiting all this time. Waiting for the real arrival of the descendant of the He family. Undoubtedly, this moment was what they had been waiting for. The soldiers looked up and saw the cold and slender figure under the moonlight. She was not tall, but she gave people the feeling that she had the world in her hands. Da Xiong was the first person to provoke Hellion Vivian, but at this moment, he simply knelt down on one knee and said in a deep voice, I, son Da Xiong, am willing to follow the young master to death. His words were like a spark that started a prairie fire. The soldiers shouted one after another, echoing throughout the entire valley, we are also willing to follow the young master to death. Hellion Vivian looked at this scene and took a deep breath. She could even feel the coldness in the air. Finally, she had the capital to take back the general's residence. Chapter 348. The last one was Kai Yang. He did not kneel. Instead, he silently raised the flag on the drill ground with one hand and placed it in front of Hellion Wei. He was dressed in a military uniform, and he stood tall and straight. When his eyes met with Hellion Vivian's, they were as deep as the sea and as deep as the night. At that moment, thousands of soldiers behind him cheered excitedly. Hellion Vivian knew that this person had an extraordinary influence in the hidden army. Later, she heard old Master He talk about his background. Only then did Hellion Vivian know that this person was the first young master of the Kai family who was personally invited to the palace by the emperor. At the age of 17, he had won against all the officials in the virtual hunt. It was no wonder that he had such a presence. Hellion Wei smiled, the corners of her mouth slightly curved. However, she realized that Kai Yang had been looking at her. His gaze was a little unfathomable. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows at him. When Kai Yang brushed past her, he sneered, it seems that you don't remember anything. Wait a minute, what should she remember? Hellion Vivian frowned slightly. What was going on? Old Master Hay did not hear anything. He patted her shoulder and said in a dignified voice, "Good job, girl. Millimeter." Hellion Vivian smiled faintly and nodded. She seemed to have thought of something and said, "I still have something to discuss with Old Master Hay. Shall we go into the tent?" Old Master Hay nodded. Kai Yang looked back at Hellion Vivian. The three of them sat in the military tent with hot tea in their hands. Hellion Vivian was a person who could not hide things. Looking at Kai Yang's cold and handsome face, she thought for a while and said, "Young Master Kai, did you have a crush on me before?" Fart. Old Master Hay spat out a mouthful of tea and coughed heavily. Kai Yang's handsome face was already half black. "Is that what you want to say?" "Of course not." Hellion Vivian observed his expression. "I just don't want there to be any misunderstanding between us." Scarlet Flame's smile grew colder. "What misunderstanding could there be between us?" Hellion Vivian curls his thin lips and smiles. "That's good." Scarlet Flame looked at her and found it interesting. Then, he said to Old Man Hay, "She doesn't even have her memories." Old Master Hay also frowned. Hellion Vivian also knew that there were loopholes in her memory. "On the day I sank into the lake, I hit my head. There are some things that I remember and some that I have forgotten." "Is that so?" Scarlet Flame's long and narrow eyes glanced in her direction. Hellion Vivian nodded. "So, can you tell me now what happened between us?" "No." Scarlet Flame's tone was indifferent. "Forget about it." Hellion Vivian was rendered speechless. Old Master Hay looked at the two of them and couldn't help but laugh. Since the other party didn't want to talk about it, Hellion Vivian didn't continue to harp on this issue. However, she was sure of one thing. This man really couldn't get along with her. However, when it came to important matters, he was a trustworthy person. Hellion Vivian curled her thin lips and said, "I will ask someone to send a batch of weapons over in a few days. When the weapons arrive, I want to modify them and let the people of the Hidden Army familiarize themselves with the operation of these weapons as soon as possible." "Change weapons?" Old Master Hay obviously didn't agree. Scarlet Flame's tone was very cold. "Everyone in the Hidden Army has their own unique weapon, so there's no need for weapons." Hearing this, Hellion Vivian smiled. Old Master Hay thought that she didn't like to hear this, so he said, "Girl, you just came to the army not long ago and aren't familiar with these people. They all have their own independent personalities. If you suddenly change weapons for them, they won't be used to it. I know that you're good at martial arts. Why don't you see if you can help them strengthen the foundation of their weapons and change the weapons?" Hellion Vivian listened quietly. After hearing this, her thin lips curved slightly. "I know all this, but this weapon of mine is different from other weapons." After speaking, Hellion Vivian stood up and glanced at the bat flying outside the tent. Suddenly, she straightened her left arm, and the small pistol in her hand was parallel to her line of sight. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and she looked indescribably handsome. Bang! A gunshot sounded. The bat fell from the sky and landed in front of the military tent. There were still traces of blood on its body. Old Master Hay was stunned. He couldn't believe what he saw. How did such a small thing shoot down the bat from such a long distance? There was no bow or arrow. Scarlet Flame also glanced at the bat beside the tent. The bat was already completely dead. It was indeed very lethal. Old Master Hay looked at it curiously and asked, "Vivian, what kind of hidden weapon is this?" Why hadn't he seen it before? "This isn't a hidden weapon. It's a pistol. However, the weapons I sent over are not just pistols." There was a smile on Hellion Wei's face. "For example, Da Xiong is an expert in heavy weapons. When the batch of weapons is completed, I will specially equip him with a strafing cannon. With one shot, he can destroy half of the city wall." "Half of the city wall?" When Old Master Hay heard the last sentence, he couldn't stay calm. "Is this small thing really that powerful?" Hellion Vivian weighed the gun in her hand. "It still needs to be improved. After it's improved, it's completely possible." As the Queen of Arms in the 21st century, Hellion Vivian knew very well how influential firearms were in the era of cold weapons. She didn't just want to get the hidden army. She also wanted to select the most elite ace battle team from the hidden army. This group of mercenaries would be faster than anyone else. They would be able to win by surprise and enter and leave the major cities as if there was no one around. When the time came, they would be carrying long guns and cannons and sweeping away thousands of soldiers. It would be indescribably cool. They would be able to fight whoever they wanted. They could even take orders and make money. When she thought of this, Helene Vivian's smile deepened. In ancient times, it was easy to defend a city, but difficult to attack it. If she had this team, she would definitely be able to reverse the situation. Old Master Hay naturally knew how powerful this was. His hand that was holding the teacup trembled slightly. Kai Yang's angular face tilted slightly. Then, he reached out and took the pistol in Helene Vivian's hand. He put it at the tip of his nose and sniffed it. His thick eyebrows furrowed slightly. This is the smell of firecrackers. That's right. Helene Vivian's long and narrow eyes flashed with moonlight. She was clearly handsome. That's why I need you to purchase a large amount of firecrackers materials and heat-resistant metals. This matter requires absolute confidentiality. Kai Yang looked at her. He seemed to be a little careless, but he went straight to Helene Vivian's weakness. How did you make this thing? Helene Vivian would not say that she was actually a person who had transmigrated. Of course not. She would definitely be burned to death by him as a demon who had taken over her body. Therefore, she put on a serious expression and said, I didn't want to say at first, but since you asked, I'll tell you. Chapter 349. At this point, Helene Vivian saw that Old Man Hay was looking at her seriously, so she continued, One night, I was sleeping in bed when I suddenly dreamt of an immortal. In the dream, the immortal said that my bones were amazing and that I would definitely be extraordinary in the future. So, he told me how to make this gun and told me not to mention it to anyone else, or else I would be punished by the heavens. After that, Helene Vivian picked up the teacup and took a sip of tea. Old Man Hay sighed after hearing that. It was indeed a miracle. Millimeter. Helene Vivian smiled faintly as usual. Scarlet Flame sneered. When he leaned over to return the gun to her, he said in a low voice, I haven't seen you for a few years, but your lying skills have improved a lot. Helene Vivian raised her eyes and looked at the pair of narrow and quiet eyes in front of her. She smiled and said, You've become much more handsome too. Scarlet Flame paused, but his playful eyes sank when he saw Helene Vivian's slender neck. Helene Vivian didn't know what Scarlet Flame was thinking, so she continued, Now, this gun can only fire one bullet at a time. After a while, I'll send someone to give you the design of a gun that can fire continuously. However, the design and production of that gun is 10 times more difficult than this single shotgun, so Old Man Hay will have to worry about it. Old Man Hay was shocked when he heard that. The appearance of a gun like this was already heaven-defying, but she could actually design a gun that could fire continuously. This was simply heaven-defying. And this person was actually the descendant of the He family that even he didn't think highly of. He had a hunch that 10 years, no, 100 years. 100 years later, when people mentioned the hidden army again, it would definitely be fresh in their mind. This was really too amazing. Old Man Hay calmed himself down and held the dragon-headed walking stick with his fingers. Vivian, seeing you like this, your grandfather will know. Don't worry, when the design is sent over, I'll ask them to do their best to make it. The three of them talked about business for a while. Helene Vivian didn't forget that she had an appointment with the dean, so she had to go back before dawn. However, before she left, she didn't know why Scarlet Flame suddenly put his hand on her collar and pulled it up. Although it was just a touch, he withdrew it immediately. However, this action still looked extremely ambiguous and strange. Especially in front of so many people. Helene Vivian's eyes flashed. On the way back, she couldn't help but ask Old Man Hay, Young Master Scarlet Flame, really doesn't have a crush on me. Cough. Old Master Hay choked again. He really couldn't bear to hurt the child's self-confidence, but there were some things he still had to say. Wei, you're really thinking too much. He likes people with white skin. Helene Wei replied, Oh, then he really has no taste. Hey was Vivian. Vivian was Vivian. The overbearing second young master of the Hay clan had just used up all his strength to jump out of the room when he met old Master Hay's incomparably deep gaze. Hellion Vivian looked at her dumbfounded friend and tried her best to hold back her laughter. After all, He-Eyes was someone that his family couldn't control since he was young. He simply smiled and said, "Grandfather, you can lock me up for a while, but you can't lock me up for life. Instead of always forcing me to marry a wife, why don't you let me earn more money? Moreover, these things really can't hold me back." As he spoke, he moved his arm and the iron chain fell to the ground. He-Eyes reached out and dusted his long robe, looking like a gentleman again. Old Master Hay looked at him and massaged his temples as if he had a headache. "Forget it. I haven't slept well these days. You should go back to the academy and take care of Weiwei." Weiwei? He-Eyes raised his eyebrows. When did his grandfather become so amiable? There was a problem. Old Master Hay waved his hand again. "Let's go. Goodbye." Hellion Vivian didn't delay. After all, she still had an agreement. Since they were sitting in the same carriage and the oil lamp was lit, He-Eyes naturally noticed something that others didn't. "What's with your neck?" "Neck?" Hellion Vivian reached out and touched her neck. She glanced sideways at the reflection in the bronze mirror. In an instant, the temperature on her face rose a few degrees. She remembered Kai Yang's slightly cold gaze in the military camp. Only then did she realize that it was all because of the marks left by a certain prince. "This doesn't look like a mosquito bite." The evil smile in He-Eyes' eyes grew stronger, but he was a little surprised. He knew very well what kind of person the current third prince was. He was cold and distant on the surface, but he was also like that on the inside. Although he was cold and courteous, he wouldn't get close to people in reality. He also had his own set of principles. He would never argue with anyone, but you could feel his displeasure and the strong pressure he unintentionally exerted on you. So, until now, even the elders of the four great families didn't dare to really offend him. At that time, when Weiwei was going to marry the third prince, He-Eyes was worried that she would become that person's chess piece. Because she didn't have any family power to support her. The third prince married her mostly because of the pressure from the retired emperor. But now, the third prince's behavior towards Weiwei simply made He-Eyes' jaw drop. He didn't expect that the third prince, who was seriously obsessed with cleanliness and hated physical contact with people, would so brazenly leave a kiss mark on another person's neck, brazenly treating it as if it was his own personal property. Some people said that on the wedding night, the third prince entered the bridal chamber because of Weiwei's face. Since when did His Highness learn to consider other people's opinions? Most of the time, he was the one who made the decision on his own, so, the third prince couldn't help but do it. When he thought of this, He-Eyes looked at Hellion Vivian sympathetically. Being chosen by a man like the third prince was worse than being a chess piece. She even had to be branded before she left the house. Wei looked at the expression in Hayzedi's eyes and knew that he'd already guessed everything. She might as well not hide it anymore. She raised her eyebrows and said, "According to your experience, how many days does it take for this mark to disappear?" She couldn't always wear this lovey-dovey kiss mark and stroll back and forth in the academy. Judging from the strength, it will take at least 2 or 3 days. He-Eyes smiled with a gloating tone. Hellion Vivian glanced at him. "It seems that we have to buy a long robe with a high collar. Bring the royal along and let him spend the money." Hellion Vivian was quite satisfied with He-Eyes' words. Soon, they arrived at the place where they parted ways. But what Hellion Vivian didn't expect was that the moment she jumped down from the carriage, she saw Yunbiluo and the rest returning to the academy at the same time. Chapter 350. Yunbiluo saw her as well. Her gaze landed on the carriage that was moving forward. If she was not mistaken, that should be the Hay family's carriage. "I've long heard that Miss Weiwei and young Master Hay are close friends. Seeing you today, it's true," Yunbiluo said with a gentle smile on her face. When the other two people heard what she said, they both curved their lips one after another. When they looked at Weiwei again, their gazes clearly contained a bit of disrespect. It could be assumed that they also considered Weiwei to be a girl who didn't know how to behave properly. Hellion Vivian did not bother with them. She yawned and continued walking forward. One of the young masters recommended by an aristocratic family sneered behind her. She was supposed to be carrying out a mission, but she went missing halfway. We even had to look for her outside the auction. The other person patted him on the shoulder. You'll only make yourself angry if you say this. Don't worry, the battle spirit forces is not like other places. These things will be reported to the higher-ups. The mentors will naturally deal with it accordingly. They know who did and who didn't. When the time comes, we'll be the ones to pass, not the others. You're right, that person laughed and gave Hellion Vivian a contemptuous look. When Hellion Vivian could not be found, Unveils thought that she came back first because she had received some news. Now it seemed that she had just arrived at the academy. Thinking of this, Unveils put on a decent smile on her gentle face. She nodded at the two people gently. It's almost dawn, let's go. As she spoke, she glanced at Hellion Vivian and said, Wei Wei was mainly in charge of the peripheral work. Although she left in the end, she did put in some effort. However, it's not convenient for us to tell you the news that we found. I hope you can understand. When Unveils said this, her face was filled with a faint smile. She was like a fairy cruising in the holy light, pure and flawless. No one could bear to hurt her. Hellion Wei's lips curled into a cold smile. Her pair of starry eyes that were as tranquil as an ancient well didn't have the slightest ripple. Her voice was very calm. Of course I understand. Isn't this the reason why you guys used so many ways and means to throw me to the outskirts? Hearing this, the expressions of the two young masters changed. Unveils bit her thin lips. Her eyebrows were filled with melancholy and sadness. She said in a hoarse voice, Wei, did you misunderstand me because of His Highness? Misunderstanding? Hellion Vivian smiled disapprovingly and said, How could I misunderstand you? Besides, Miss Yun, I have to remind you that we are not that close. You can call me Third Princess Consort. The words Third Princess Consort made Unveils' fingers tighten. She looked at Hellion Vivian as if she was in pain. I just want to make friends with you. Since Miss Vivian thinks that I'm out of your league, then forget it. Hellion Vivian stopped in her tracks. Looking at the expression on Unveils' face, she suddenly lowered her body. Hellion Wei's height had always been taller than the average girl. She was 170 centimeters tall with two slender long legs. Her chest and waist were very standard. When her charm was fully unleashed, it was a strong queen's temperament. Especially with her posture, she tilted her head and looked at Unveils, who was a head shorter than her. Lowering her voice, she gave people a comfortable and handsome feeling. Unveils, I know why you came to the White Academy. You don't have to pretend anymore. Others may not know why Heiju ostracized me, but do you think I don't know? What benefits did you promise her to make her defy Belegaju's order and spread rumors about me everywhere? Unveils' expression changed when she heard these words. She looked at Hellion Vivian with eyes full of doubt and disbelief. She muttered, Miss Vivian, what are you talking about? What's wrong with Heiju? Hearing Unveils' denial, Hellion Wei slowly straightened her body and smiled faintly. Miss Yun, there's one thing about you that I really admire. Your acting skills are so good that it's almost perfect. Hearing this, Unveils' face turned even paler. Her forbearance and grievance, coupled with her good looks. Compared to Hellion Wei's current indifferent and dark complexion, it was simply a contrast between Snow White and an evil empress. The two young masters in front could not stand it anymore. Miss Yun, why are you telling her these things? She didn't do anything. It's reasonable that she didn't get any news. Unveils tried hard to take a deep breath, as if she was suppressing a great grievance. She raised her beautiful face and said in a weak and hoarse voice, I'm the one who's climbing up the social ladder. Let's go quickly. The dean is still waiting for our news. The two young masters nodded and looked at Hellion Vivian coldly. When the time comes, don't be a sore loser. A sore loser. Hellion Vivian rubbed the banknote that the dean insisted on giving to her with her fingers. She smiled faintly but with a hint of evil. Yuan Ming, on the other hand, was rejoicing in his misfortune. I wonder how these people will react when they hear the news of your victory. Hellion Vivian smiled and did not say anything. She followed them. Her green and white robe fluttered slightly. Her temperament was cold and her laziness did not diminish at all. Soon, Unveils and the rest arrived at the underground palace. Tu Su Feng sat in front of the desk with a cup of hot tea in his hand. He exuded the charm of a man of his age. He was gentle and gentlemanly. "Have a seat." As usual, he asked someone to pour tea for the students. After seeing Helian Vivian, who came in last, he smiled and set his eyes on Unveils and the rest. Unveils stood up. Her voice was neither fast nor slow. She smoothly told Tu Su Feng about the result of their discussion at the auction. Tu Su Feng took a sip of tea with a smile on his face. "That's it." "Yes." Unveils smiled gently. "The intervention of the royal family made it impossible for us to continue the investigation. However, judging from the current news, Murong Hongtu is indeed problematic." Tu Su Feng nodded and put his hands on the desk. "You said that Murong Hongtu met with rich businessmen. What's the purpose of his meeting with them?" Unveils paused and said, "We're not sure about this. However, since he met with rich people, it should be related to corruption." "That's right." The other two people chimed in. Their gazes towards Unveils were filled with admiration. Miss Yun was indeed worthy of her reputation. Her reaction was quick enough. However, Tu Su Feng just glanced at Unveils and did not say anything else. Unveils did not notice at first. Later on, she realized that Tu Su Feng had not spoken for a long time. She asked awkwardly, "Dean?" Chapter 351. There were 6 of you when you went out. Tu Su Feng didn't follow up with her words. Instead, he suddenly said, "They came back separately. Right now, there are still 2 people who haven't come back. Who can explain to me where those 2 people are right now?" Unveils was speechless. However, Helian Wei opened her mouth and said, "It's my fault for forgetting to report this. Little 7 is still too young." After completing his mission, he followed the 3rd prince home to sleep. Young Master Han needs to clean up the loose ends. This way, no one will be able to know about this matter and achieve absolute secrecy. Young Master Han's identity is most suitable for this task. "Very good." Tu Su Feng nodded, then met Unveils' gaze. "There must be something wrong with the person the battle spirit forces asked you to investigate. If there is nothing wrong, they won't ask you to investigate. The main thing is, have you found out what's wrong with Murong Hongtu? Obviously, you didn't find out anything." The 2 young masters were anxious to explain. However, they were interrupted by Tu Su Feng slowly. "Young Master Liang, Young Master Li, maybe you know these 2 people." As he spoke, Tu Su Feng glanced behind him and ordered, "You can come out now." "Yes." A sloppy voice was heard. Helian Vivian followed the voice and looked over. She saw a clean-looking man strolling over. Gradually, his figure and appearance appeared in the swaying light. When the 2 young masters saw the man again, their expressions changed completely. They looked at each other in panic. It was obvious that they had a guilty conscience. Unveils did not know what happened. There was no smile on Tu Su Feng's face. "I have already warned you again and again not to reveal your identities to anyone, and not to reveal any information about the battle spirit forces. But clearly, someone has ignored my warning." Upon hearing this, the 2 young masters fell back to their seats with a thud. "How can this be? How can this person be here? Did you think that I wouldn't send someone to follow you when you were carrying out the mission?" Tu Su Feng's gaze swept past them. "Every one of you has your own test. Just because you were left alone and were threatened with a knife, you betrayed the battle spirit forces. The battle spirit forces will not take back such people. Charm, take these 2 people down and erase their memories." The man called Charm smiled evilly and easily lifted the 2 people up. "Let's go, you 2 cowards who are afraid of death." Unveils was a little dizzy from the scene in front of her, but as long as she was not the one being taken away, everything was fine. "Miss Yun." Tu Su Feng retracted his gaze from the 2 screaming men and shifted it to Unveils. "Your performance was a little too strong, but you passed." Hearing that, Unveils' thin lips curled upwards. She then looked at Helian Vivian with a smile on her face. But what she didn't expect was that Tu Su Feng's next sentence was actually, "The winner of this test is still Wei Wei. Wei Wei, you can keep the prize money." Okay. Hellion Vivian's expression did not change at all. On the other hand, Yun Biluo's smile looked a little stiff. She bit her lips awkwardly and forced a smile on her face. In an instant, she had returned to her original elegant demeanor. She raised her cup to Hellion Vivian and said, "Wei Wei, congratulations." Hellion Wei Wei did not refuse and glanced at her with interest. Then, she raised her cup slightly and drank the tea in one gulp. Her tone was indifferent as she said, "Miss Yun's memory doesn't seem to be very good. I've said before that we're not that close, so please don't call me Wei Wei anymore." As soon as she finished speaking, Hellion Wei Wei did not care if Yun Biluo was feeling wronged like a young girl who lost her footing. She turned around and said to Tu Su Feng, "If there is nothing else, I will go back to sleep now." After going back and forth for an entire night, there were only 2 fights in one night. In addition, these people were not easy to deal with. Especially the baby who possessed Murong Hongtu's body, it made Hellion Vivian even more uncomfortable. She even wondered if His Highness would use insecticide to kill her if he found out that she was using someone else's body one day. Tu Su Feng saw her yawning twice in a row but did not stop her from asking about the hidden army. Since she came back with a smile, the result should not be too bad. Yun Biluo looked at the 2 people who had ignored her. Her fingertips that were holding the white handkerchief tightened silently. Her face was stiff and slightly pale, and her beautiful eyes overflowed with a weak dim light. She looked at Tu Su Feng pitifully. However, Tu Su Feng did not look at her again. He lowered his head and seemed to be dealing with official business. "Dean." After Hellion Vivian left, Yun Biluo spoke, "Does the retired emperor still dislike me being around His Highness?" Tu Su Feng put down the brush in his hand and faintly glanced at her. A few simple words. "This is the Battle Spirit Forces camp, it's not suitable to talk about private matters. Moreover, this kind of matter, you should directly ask retired emperor." Yun Biluo knew when to advance and when to retreat. Now that she heard Tu Su Feng's words, she quickly suppressed the bitterness in her throat and smiled, "I understand. I'll go back to my room. Dean, you should rest early too." Tu Su Feng nodded. He looked at Yun Biluo's disappearing figure and frowned slightly. He did not know what his cold nephew thought of Yun Biluo. So far, there were so many versions of the rumors. He did not know which one to believe. However, the only thing he was sure of was that the cold boy would not be swayed by anyone's appearance. This time, the Murong family's plan was completely wrong. At the same time, in the courtyard of the South District, Emperor Murong listened to the servant's report. The flesh on his face trembled. Good, this third prince. He dares to arrest anyone. He's really been spoiled by the retired emperor. I'll go to the palace now and report to the emperor. The Murong family has been loyal for 3 generations. The third prince can arrest anyone he wants. He has to give me an explanation. I've already told the empress," the servant stammered, but the emperor just allowed it. "No one knows why." Emperor Murong was stunned. The emperor allowed it. "Yes." The servant looked down. Emperor Murong still could not believe it. However, he heard a lukewarm voice coming from the study room. It was gentle and elegant. "I've said it before. He's hard to deal with. Now you should know." Emperor Murong's expression changed when he heard the voice. He dismissed the servant and called out, "Young master." Chapter 352. Under the morning light, a man dressed in white sat on a wooden chair. When he saw Emperor Murong, he closed the book in his hand and slowly stood up. His eyes were indifferent. "Your Highness, it's been a long time. Please take a seat, young master." Emperor Murong was very polite when he saw the man. He even bowed and groveled, "Please enlighten me, young master. What should I do next?" The man smiled. What he said was enough to chill the surrounding air. "I heard that the emperor is dying. Why don't you take his place, your highness?" After saying this, the man strolled into the drizzle. His figure was tall and straight, and could be considered perfect. The manservants in the mansion could not help but look at him. They did not know what their highness said to him. But that day, Emperor Murong sat in the study room in the same posture for the time it took to burn a stick of incense. After the rain, the sky was bright. After Helian Wei returned, she lay on the bed and fell asleep. She'd long forgotten about her promise to give third prince a bath. She didn't know which corner of her mind. Someone came in. Helian Vivian's first reaction was Qing Zhon. Qing Zhon must have come in to help her wash up. She had nothing to hide in front of Qing Zhon. He stretched lazily, got up, and walked around the screen. However, when he saw the person standing outside, he was stunned. Helian Vivian was stunned. Why did His Highness appear here so early in the morning? Didn't he usually sleep until noon? Helian Wei realized that she was only wearing a pair of underwear on the lower half of her body. She lowered her head and looked at herself, then quickly retreated behind the screen. You wait for a moment. She couldn't express herself clearly while casually pulling out a pair of pajama pants. Beligaju walked in. His eyes were deep and there was something indescribable. Helian Vivian put on the pajama pants. She saw that Beligaju's expression was not very good. He seemed to be colder than usual. She raised her eyebrows. You came here so early in the morning. Is there something you need from me? Bailey Jiaju glanced at her. His tone was neither cold nor light. You forgot. What? Helian Vivian felt her scalp tighten every time she talked to His Highness. Did he say that she forgot to lock herself back in? Beligaju slowly raised his injured hand. Only then did Helian Vivian remember that she had promised to bathe His Highness yesterday. But, isn't it morning? Bailey Jiaju looked at Helian Wei's expression. His voice was indifferent with a unique evil laziness. You really did forget about bathing for me. Aren't you supposed to bathe at night? Helian Vivian raised her eyebrows. Beligaju reminded her, you didn't fulfill your promise last night. I was too busy yesterday. I'll go get some hot water now. She couldn't help it. His Highness' expression of if you don't wash up, there will be a perverted way to punish you really made Helian Vivian unable to resist. Not to mention that she had indeed promised. In addition, His Highness always made people feel guilty when he spoke. Therefore, Helian Vivian wasn't too unwilling. She yawned lazily and scooped water with a wooden spoon with a faint smile on her face. Bailey Jiaju took an ancient book from her bookshelf, supported his chin with one hand, and sat by the window, flipping through it casually. His mind was filled with the appearance of Wei's pair of slender, and white legs from a moment ago. It's just that this was enough, but she was still wearing a slightly loose white undergarment. The red marks on her neck were clearly visible at a glance. The lapel of the garment was half covering and half covering, revealing a slender neck, simply made people want to swish. With a sound, the man exerted force in his hand and a corner of the ancient book was missing. Beligaju acted as if nothing had happened. He dusted his robe, but his eyes were deep, as if he was waiting for an opportunity to make a move. When Helian Vivian poured the water into the bathtub, she felt a burning sensation on her back. When she turned her head, she saw Beligaju leaning to the side, elegantly and indifferently unbuttoning his collar. When his robe was removed, it was just that good figure that would make even God jealous. Helian Vivian didn't look at him anymore. She turned her head and sprinkled flower petals into the wooden tub. She thought that a person who bathed 3 times a day would definitely have a certain level of desire for water quality. Unexpectedly, when Beligaju walked in, the space behind the screen seemed to be narrow and sealed, as if no one would see what he was doing. Helian Vivian subconsciously moved back and took a white towel. She turned her face and said, "The temperature of the water is just right. You can soak in now." As the steam filled the air, Helian Vivian's face was calm. Beligaju looked at her playfully. A normal woman would definitely blush in this situation. But this little thing had a bit of a ruffian aura. Those who didn't know would think that she was very skilled. Beligaju curved his thin lips and stepped into the wooden tub with his long legs. In the middle of the night, he was only wearing a white robe with wide sleeves. Half of his thin and attractive chest was exposed. His ink-black hair fell behind, and a pair of indifferent eyes like an ancient well emitted a faint light, as if to suppress all the other colors. He was so handsome that it was indescribable. Helene Vivian didn't feel that she was at a disadvantage at all to bathe such a beautiful man. Instead, she felt quite happy. She whistled and took the towel back and forth to wipe Beligaju. There wasn't any embarrassing scene. It was just that every time Helene Vivian put her hand into the bathtub, she would be a little careful to avoid touching any places that weren't allowed to be touched. Beligaju smiled more and more playfully. After a long time, there was a bit of evil charm. Okay. Helene Vivian retracted her hand and smiled lightly. Be careful not to get your left hand wet. Splat. The water droplets that she didn't have time to wipe dry dripped onto her white underwear as she spoke. The material of the clothes became a little transparent, and the red bellyband inside could be vaguely seen. Beligaju's Adam's apple moved, and he stared at her chest without hiding anything. His voice became a little low and hoarse. Are you sure? Yes. Helene Vivian looked at his slender figure. His shoulders, arms, and back had been washed. There shouldn't be a problem. Beligaju glanced at her and seemed to be a little careless. You didn't even touch the parts above the legs and below the abdomen. Above the back and below the waist. Helene Vivian followed his words and looked over. Her face suddenly seemed to be burning, very hot. Even if she had a cold and ruffian temperament, when she met a man like Beligaju, she didn't understand how a certain highness could say that part in such an indifferent tone. It was as if she would be irresponsible if she didn't wash that part of his body. Bailey Georgiou looked at the rare crimson blush on her face and leaned over. His endlessly bewitching handsome face came closer to hers as he smelled the faint fragrance on her body. The tip of his nose lightly touched the soft strands of hair. His voice was as low as a whisper, "Why aren't you talking?" Chapter 353. Helene Vivian's ears went numb for a moment. Then she smiled and got up nimbly. There are some places that your highness should wash yourself. Beligaju, who was sitting in the bathtub, looked at Helene Vivian with deep eyes. Okay. So straightforward? Helene Vivian couldn't believe it. Beligaju really raised his hand. Give me the bath mud. Helene Vivian said oh and handed it over. Beligaju didn't take it. Instead, he asked her a question that didn't make sense. Are you only wearing a bra? Yes. Helene Vivian was not used to the layers of clothes of ancient people. Wearing a bra and a pair of loose cotton pants should be nothing. But Helene Wei didn't know that when this kind of material was soaked in water, it was more beautiful than wearing nothing. Beligaju's long and narrow eyes darkened. Then he stretched out his hand as if he wanted to stand up. But because his left hand was still wrapped with a cloth, he suddenly slipped. Helene Vivian subconsciously reached out to grab him. But she was directly pulled over by this force and fell into the bathtub. Splash! When Helene Vivian came out again, her body was already soaked. Even the hair that reached her waist was floating with the bright red roses. He seemed to be worried that she was hurt. He held her waist with one hand from behind. There was a devilish look in his eyes. It was really dangerous. The wound almost got wet. Helene Vivian could even feel Beligaju's lips touching her earlobe. Yes, it was indeed a little dangerous. Helene Vivian tilted her head, trying to avoid this overly intimate action. But Beligaju pressed her into the water and slowly undid the collar of her bra. Then, he narrowed his eyes and touched the red mark on her neck. Helene Vivian was touched by his action. Even her fingers were numb. And for some reason, the place where his fingers touched was especially sensitive. It does look very deep. Bailey Georgiou's deep voice rang in her ears, matching the look in his eyes at this very moment. Helene Vivian felt an uneasy heat all over her body. She glanced at Beligaju and wanted to stand up. Don't move. Beligaju held her hand and moved closer to her. His expression was indifferent and noble. If you continue to move, I can't guarantee that I can control myself. It seemed that he was saying that she was seducing him. But Helene Vivian still didn't move. It wasn't because she was afraid, but the temperature from that part of his body, it was obviously bulging. Helene Vivian was shocked by that shape. Her eyes trembled. However, Bailey Georgiou was still holding her waist, his eyes slightly darkened. It was still more comfortable to hug her when she was only wearing her underwear. However, if she was not wearing anything, the touch would definitely be better. Thinking of this, all the blood in his body seemed to be boiling, and all of them fused together, standing straight there. This made Beligaju move the person in his arms involuntarily. This kind of movement naturally made Helion Wei's entire body even more tense. However, she stiffened and turned her head to look at him in confusion. Beligaju was very calm. My legs are a little numb after staying in the same position for too long. Could it be that she was wrong? Helion Vivian saw his indifferent expression and started to doubt her guess just now. Could it be that he didn't do it on purpose? At this time, Beligaju let go of her at the right time. He looked like a very well-mannered gentleman. Go and change your clothes first. Hearing this, Helion Vivian immediately stood up. She quickly got up and walked out of the bathtub. Beligaju looked at the figure that disappeared behind the screen and raised his eyebrows. She escaped quickly. You should at least leave the towel for me when you leave. Helion Vivian heard the faint voice behind her. She snorted and used force in her left hand. The white towel in her hand fell into the bathtub in the shape of a parabola. Bailey Jiaoju looked at the towel in front of him and curled his lips into a smile. Then, he stood up from the bathtub and slowly wiped the water droplets off his body. His voice was slow and cold. Cheline, come out. TSK, TSK, TSK. Master can still find out like this. Fire Cheline showed its faintly discernible figure. It lowered its head and licked its mighty big claws. Beligaju glanced at it coldly. That glance made it and its claws stiffen. Damn it, it couldn't move. How could this be? When it raised its head again, it saw that its master's eyes had a hint of golden light. Fire Cheline then realized that its master had used the body-fixing technique on it. It was instantly melancholy. Master, I didn't offend you, right? When I do something, I don't like to have people watching. Beligaju's eyes were indifferent. Fire Cheline coughed softly. I didn't see, really. But, Master, you did it on purpose just now, right? How could you not be able to stand and your wound was wet? You clearly wanted to drag me into the water with you. Beligaju didn't deny it. He threw the white towel in his hand to the side and walked out of the bathtub with his upper body that made people jealous. Every texture of his muscles was just right. Wait, what should I do? Is Master not planning to let me go? I was just telling the truth, okay. Fire Cheline wanted to cry but had no tears. It could only maintain its standing posture with one leg. Its tongue was still licking its claws. Its reflection in the bathtub made it look stupid no matter how you looked at it. Haha, it was ruining its image. Coincidentally, a sparrow flew over and landed on a branch. It looked at Fire Cheline with a face full of worship. What do you think Boss Cheline is doing? His posture is so strange. I don't know either. Fire Cheline heard this and immediately replied in a deep voice, I'm practicing my balancing ability. Image. It must maintain its handsome and heroic image in the eyes of cute little beast. So you're practicing your balancing ability. The sparrows began to chirp and jump again. They looked at Fire Cheline with starry eyes. Boss is so handsome. Fire Cheline nodded naturally. His posture was very domineering. One of the sparrows jumped down and stared at Fire Cheline with its eyes wide open. Boss, can you change your posture? Let's see your other actions first. Fire Cheline. Damn. Master, help, quickly undo my body freezing spell. Hearing the wailing behind him, Bailey Jiaoju did not have the slightest intention of turning his head back. The corners of his mouth curved into an evil smile, his slender fingers rubbed his slightly damp black hair, bent over to pour himself a cup of tea, took a sip, then slightly raised his eyebrows and looked at Wei who was standing in front of the bed. What are you doing? Helion Vivian didn't expect him to come out so soon. She was still looking at the clothes in front of her, wondering which one could cover the marks on her neck. She was frowning at the long robes on the bed. When she turned around, she saw a certain highness with a bare upper body, long legs and long arms, looking very seductive. Chapter 354. It was probably because of his temperament. That kind of dense, cold, and ascetic temperament made it even harder for people to look away when they saw him like this. A man like this was really rare in the world. Helene Vivian was a person who cared a lot about appearances. After one glance, she felt that it wasn't enough, so she took another look. With this kind of physique, if he were to film in the 21st century, countless people would definitely lick the screen. Even though Helene Vivian had seen many world-class stars, she still felt that very few people had the kind of luxurious and enchanting aristocratic aura that His Highness had. Noticing Helene Vivian's gaze, Bellegaju's lips curved up. That kind of smile made him look even more handsome. Helene Vivian took another look at him, but coincidentally met his gaze as well. It was as if he was deliberately catching her. For a moment, Helene Vivian seemed to hear the stagnation in the air. "Why are you looking at me?" Bellegaju asked with a smile. "Helene Vivian. We were clearly looking at each other. Why did it seem like I was peeping at you?" Bellegaju looked at her expression. His unsatisfied mood improved again. The corners of his mouth curved up, and his entire body emitted a unique charm. Helene Vivian felt that this person was constantly using his handsome man to trick her. Fortunately, she had better self-control. If she had pounced on him— Wait a minute, why did she want to pounce on him? "Woman, don't suppress your natural instincts." Yuan Ming's evil voice sounded. "You have less than 5 days left. The closer it is to dual cultivation, the more your body is out of your control. Why do you have to work so hard? If you want it, then do it." Helene Wei didn't pay attention to Yuan Ming and directly stuffed him back into the celestial boundary space. She looked at Bailey Jiaoju's apathetic and narrow eyes and sat on the wooden chair with her legs slightly crossed. She drank a mouthful of tea and then said, "I want to go buy some clothes." "Buy clothes?" Bellegaju didn't expect to get such an answer. The hand that was drying his hair obviously paused. Helene Vivian nodded and thought to herself, "It's all because of you, the main culprit. Otherwise, I wouldn't have to specially buy a high-collared robe in the middle of summer. You really should buy more clothes to wear." Bellegaju glanced at her again. His gaze was indifferent and noble, like a domineering CEO looking at a homeless person on the streets. Helene Vivian raised her eyebrows. What kind of look was that? She was also very rich. Let's go shopping now." Bellegaju put on the robe, and his posture was as smooth as flowing water. Helene Vivian didn't know how to react. "Shadow." Bellegaju called out the shadow guards accompanying him, "Go and get ready." And Ying turned his head and replied, "Yes. Actually, I can go by myself." "You're so busy." Helene Vivian smiled at Bellegaju. She was as smart as usual. Shopping was so troublesome, people like the royal family definitely wouldn't like it. Unexpectedly, Bellegaju only gave her 3 words, "No." Helene Vivian. "Fuck. Why not? I really can't agree with your taste." Bellegaju took the lead and walked out. There it is again. That cold and condescending gaze. It really made people want to beat him up. Helene Vivian told herself to get used to it. After all, in the eyes of a certain highness, she was just a 2-legged prey. When Bailey Jiaoju turned around, what he saw was Helene Wei's creased eyebrows with a conflicted look on her face. Immediately, his thin lips curved into a smile. Helene Vivian silently ridiculed. Sure enough, a certain highness interest was something a mortal like her couldn't understand. It couldn't be more perverted. However, looking at his clothes, she knew that Bellegaju had good taste. It wasn't a bad idea to bring such a man out shopping. "Before we set off, let's eat something first." Helene Vivian rubbed her stomach. She had been hungry for a long time. Right now, she only wanted to eat the fragrant white rice. It would be even better if it could be paired with a plate of spiced beef. Bellegaju didn't look at her with that discriminatory gaze this time. He asked someone to prepare the meal. The 2 of them didn't eat in the house. Instead, they ate in the pavilion in the courtyard. The wine and dishes were served, and each dish was overflowing with fragrance. Helene Vivian ate with satisfaction. Royal family didn't want to eat. She basically finished all the food that was served to her. There was no sense of discomfort. Both of them were very lazy people. Their good upbringing could be seen at the dining table. It was just that one ate like a poster, while the other was more natural. She wasn't picky about food. They complemented each other. It was rare to see a girl like Helene Vivian who ate so much. She wasn't pretentious and ate whatever was fed to her. This made Beligaju smile even more. He felt that she saved him a lot of trouble in terms of feeding. After the two of them finished eating, they walked side by side toward the gate of the academy when they saw that it was almost time. Helene Vivian also began to notice that the number of shadow guards following Beligaju was more than 10 times more than usual. Although they didn't come out and hid well, Helene Vivian could still sense the difference. Now that the power in the imperial court was unstable, there would be a lot of trouble after His Highness' identity was exposed in the White Academy. In addition, he had caught Murong Hongtu yesterday. Empress Murong would definitely not let it go. Now that he thought about it, His Highness probably had more enemies than him. Women played with tricks, while men played with military power. There would definitely be some movement in the Murong mansion. It would probably be in 1 or 2 days. Helene Vivian thought of this. She paused and said, "I'm already doing the firearms you mentioned last time. I'll be out in 2 days." Beligaju nodded faintly. He looked at Helene Vivian with a deep meaning that made her scalp numb. "You seem to be very good at this." Helene Vivian paused. Fortunately, Beligaju didn't continue to ask. He looked at her faintly. "What about the name?" Helene Vivian put on a serious face. "I'm still thinking. The main thing is what kind of name he wants. Doesn't the royal realize how difficult it is to serve him?" It was very clear that His Highness, who had always lived in the clouds, did not have this kind of feeling, because the people below him had to use all their brains just to guess his thoughts. They were eager to be able to serve this master, so how could they dare to find fault with His Highness? The good thing about Beligaju was that he had a good family education. Although this kind of education was just a disguise, it still made people feel that he was very polite. "Where do you want to go later?" Helene Vivian was casual. "Just find a cloth store. As long as she could find one with a collar to cover the marks on her neck." Chapter 355. Beligaju asked again, "How much do you want?" Helene Vivian calculated according to the price in ancient times. It was summer now, so there was no need for expensive fur coats. A normal robe would cost about 10 taels, and the most expensive one would cost no more than 50 taels. She thought that 70 taels would be enough, so she directly reported it to Beligaju, around 70 taels, or a little more. In order to prove that she was also rich, Helene Vivian emphasized the last part. Beligaju raised an eyebrow. 70 taels shouldn't be enough to buy an inner robe. Helene Vivian's mouth twitched. I meant a set." Beligaju looked at her for a while and frowned. "So you're that poor?" Helene Vivian. She clearly asked for the most expensive one. The best clothes for the young ladies of aristocratic families only cost about 50 taels. Why did she always feel like she was a nouveau riche who had never seen the world in front of His Highness? "Hurry up and tell her that this must be an illusion." Beligaju lowered his eyes and looked at her. "If you're short on money in the future, you can go to Shadow to get it. I'll help you choose what you want to wear later, then you can try it on." Was he disdainful of her clothes? Helene Vivian wanted to explain herself. But Beligaju looked at her like he was looking at a stray cat, so she really couldn't explain. Even Helene Wei herself started to doubt herself. Was she really that poor? Fortunately, there were still normal people. Shadow stood beside her and whispered to her, "His Highness is used to using good things since he was young. It's not just good things, it's probably the best thing in the world." Helene Vivian already knew that this man was raised in gold, so she didn't care. Shadow had prepared the best carriage. He walked to the front of the carriage, put his finger on his left arm, and bowed respectfully to Helene Vivian and Beligaju. Ever since His Highness announced his identity, he didn't care about leave requests anymore. The teachers did not even have time to line up to see him off. Originally, this student was already a headache for the teachers. Now that they knew his identity, the teachers felt even more troubled. There was only one reason. They really didn't dare to control such a student. Even if Bailey Jiuju did not reveal his identity as a prince, he could make the teachers involuntarily hand over the leave slip with just one glance. Hearing that Beligaju was going to take Helene Vivian shopping, Even Eunuch Sun specially rushed over from the imperial palace to meet them at the foot of the mountain. Along the way, he looked at Belegaju with watery eyes. His Highness actually knew to come out with a woman to stroll around the city. If this was in the past, Eunuch Sun wouldn't even dare to think about it. So, she was still the eldest miss. Oh, no, she should be called Princess Consort now. Princess Consort still had a way. Thus, as soon as Hellion Vivian got off the carriage, Eunuch Sun stuffed a bunch of banknotes into her hands. Princess Consort, buy more. If it's not enough, this servant still has more. I'll wait outside. You and His Highness, take your time shopping, take your time. Hellion Vivian looked at the banknotes in her hands. Each banknote was worth 100 taels. There were about 70 to 80 banknotes in total. If she calculated it like this, she really didn't have enough money. Belegaju seemed to be used to it. In his eyes, the banknotes were like white paper. There was no difference. On this point, Hellion Wei really admired His Highness. He treated money like nothing. She couldn't do it. What she loved the most was the color of silver. Hellion Vivian blew the banknotes in her hands. Her lips curved into a roguish smile. When the time came, she would return how much was left. She, Hellion Vivian, loved money, but she didn't take advantage of anyone. The main thing was whether the clothes were comfortable or not. Whether they looked good or not, the amount of money wasn't the main point. Let's go. Belegaju brushed his robes. His voice was as indifferent as usual. He freed one hand and took her in his arms. Hellion Vivian was also generous. She didn't forget that Eunuch Sun was looking behind them. He would definitely report to the retired emperor. Sometimes, it was necessary to show affection. Thinking of this, Hellion Vivian looked back. She saw Eunuch Sun raise his hands and cheer her on. She suddenly had the urge to facepalm and sigh. However, the place that Bailey Jiaoju brought her to was indeed extraordinarily good. She could guess a thing or two just by looking at the charm of the main hall. In addition, as soon as she stepped into this place, she was greeted by swaying green bamboos, which added a touch of artistic conception. Hellion Vivian raised her eyes and looked over. She saw 4 golden words on the horizontal board, Imperial Cloth. Belegaju brought her in. The female master seemed to know Belegaju. After seeing him, her eyes lit up. This subordinate just received the news from Shadow and was shocked. I didn't expect that master would really come. It was master, not His Highness. It seemed that this imperial cloth was opened by Belegaju himself. Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips. No wonder the people of Dragon War Empire said that the world's first royal family was rich enough to rival a country. Even this cloth shop was more exquisite than others. Looking at the robes that the master was wearing, it was made of the best silk. Hellion Vivian wasn't someone who had never seen the market. Naturally, she could recognize what was good. Presumably, this is the princess. The master looked at Hellion Vivian. Originally, she wanted to praise her beauty, but after seeing Hellion Vivian's face, she could only change her words. This subordinate pays respect to the princess. Hellion Vivian waved her hand. There's no need for these formalities outside. I want to choose a robe. Do you have any recommendations? The master looked at Hellion Vivian again. The princess's figure is good. She has the right places and the right places. She won't be ugly no matter what she wears. The master was speaking the truth. Putting aside the princess's face, this figure was simply the best. Hellion Wei naturally knew about this. When she first transmigrated, she felt that the original owner of this body must have thought that she was too young and had developed too well. That was why her back was a little hunched and her breasts were a little receding. She deliberately adjusted this aspect. Speaking of which, she was just a young girl. It was always right to drink more milk. While the two of them were talking, Belegaju's finger slightly picked out a set of ancient nightgown. That nightgown was white satin. The sleeves were wide wings. It was gentle and beautiful, but it didn't lose its free and easy nature. It had a cold and elegant taste. Hellion Vivian also looked good, but, I'm here to choose a robe. Belegaju didn't speak. He just looked at her quietly. Those deep black eyes were reminding her. She almost forgot that she was a person without taste now. She must accept a certain highness choice. I'll try it. Anyway, she liked this style. She could look at the robe later. Hellion Vivian took the nightgown and was led into the inner room by the master. Chapter 356. Princess Consort really has a good figure. The old master looked at the woman in front of him. It was very difficult for people to wear this nightgown because of its length. Some women, no matter how beautiful they were, would feel awkward wearing this as if they had stolen an adult's clothes. Only Hellion Vivian could wear that lazy look to the extreme. Even the old master himself thought that wearing this kind of nightgown would make people feel distant. But Hellion Vivian was different. Just like the old master said, her figure was very good. So when the pure white clothes were worn on her, not only did it not have that kind of dull feeling, it was exquisite and delicate. Her temperament was like jade, but it also had a free and easy feeling. Come here. Beligaju raised his eyes to look at her. His legs were slightly crossed as he sat on the wooden chair. His body was elegantly and lazily leaning back. There was a water bottle by his hand. His side profile was handsome and cold, and his domineering aura was at its peak. Wasn't the light here very good? He wanted to look closer. Hellion Vivian suspiciously walked over. But she didn't expect that when they were almost face to face, Beligaju still felt that it wasn't enough and grabbed her arm to pull her closer. The old master was very smart. Seeing this scene, he quickly closed the door for the two of them and then hurriedly retreated. Hellion Vivian was still frowning. Bailey Jiaoju had already pressed her down on his long thighs, his fingers very naturally probed into her robe. Hellion Vivian immediately froze. She never thought that things would develop like this. It looked like he just found a place where there were only the two of them so that he could properly bully her. En. That handsome face came closer, so close that she could feel his breath. Do you want the people outside to hear? That hoarse voice echoed in her ears. The tone was so slow that it was almost a whisper. Be good. You know, I don't want to use any tricks on you. This didn't count as using any tricks. Hellion Vivian wanted to move away from him, but just as she moved, his broad palm quickly reached over and tightly gripped her arm, forcing her to be unable to move. In the end, even if he didn't use his hands, she couldn't move. His Highness must have done something to her again. There seems to be something missing. Beligaju looked at Hellion Vivian, who was in his arms. Then, he picked up the teapot that was filled with warm water and slowly poured all the water on Hellion Wei's body. Although the temperature of the water remained the same, it still made Hellion Vivian shiver. She raised her eyebrows and looked at the man in front of her. She shouted in a low voice, Beligaju. But he acted as if he didn't hear it. His big hand pressed down on the long leg that she wanted to lift up. With a faint smile, he approached her shining eyes. I knew that this color suits you very well. As he spoke, he lifted her up and carried her straight into the inner room, where there was a 1-meter-tall bronze mirror. Hellion Vivian didn't dare to look at herself in the bronze mirror. Her wet white nightgown stuck to her body, faintly revealing the red cloth inside. Her slender legs stood on the fine carpet, and her white toes were set off by the black carpet, which made her look a little charming. Beligaju stood behind her, one hand around her waist, the other caressing her neck. His noble and indifferent side profile had a rare devilish aura, and his white teeth were slightly exposed. He was like a vampire count in the Middle Ages, thinking about how to suck the perfect prey when he found it. Hellion Vivian didn't know if it was because of this position that he could see everything, but the stimulation seemed to be twice as intense as usual. He held her firmly in his arms and kissed her from her ear to her neck. The strong masculine scent and the burning aroma of wine slowly numbed her body, causing her to panic and want to struggle. However, he held her wrists with one hand, while his other hand instinctively went to her chest and messed around. He easily pulled off a few buttons, revealing her bright red underwear. She didn't know when the nightgown was half open, but Beligaju still refused to let her go. His thin lips rubbed back and forth on the place where the red mark had been, as if to confirm that it was his exclusive brand. Suddenly, he raised the corner of his mouth slightly and bit that place again. Since you didn't help your husband clean when I took a bath, you should pay it back now. Bellegaju's actions became more and more excessive, as if he knew that she couldn't resist at this time, and kissed Hellion Vivian heavily and lightly on her bellyband, as if he was punishing her, but it was as gentle as spring water. Hellion Vivian was forced to bear the heat from him, and her back was tightly pressed against him. In front of her was a bronze mirror that only made her feel ashamed, and her long legs were weak as if they weren't on the ground at all. The body in youth was so sensitive, and recently so Hellion Vivian couldn't control herself at all. Her fingers pressed on the man's hand, and it was unknown whether she was resisting or wanting him to continue. This kind of action provoked even more passion from Bailey Georgiou. His scalding big palm continuously kneaded her softness through the bellyband. Do you like the clothes that I've chosen for you? Are you here to help me choose clothes? Hellion Vivian's whole body was losing strength, and she could only bite her thin lips fiercely to stop her voice from trembling. You used the body-fixing spell on me. Bellegaju used force and smiled lightly, making him look like a jade-like noble young master, but it was a pity that his eyes weren't clean enough, and were dyed with a deep demonic nature. What? Do you want me to undo it for you? Hellion Vivian nodded, but her voice was much hoarser than usual. I can help you undo it. Bellegaju's tone was very light, but the content of his words was, but I need your hand to complete the work you should have done. Work? Who would treat this kind of thing as work? Hellion Vivian's face was burning hot, and she wanted to use her own strength to undo the body-fixing spell. If you don't want to, or break through the body-fixing spell yourself. Bellegaju's thin lips leaned against her ear, then I will use other methods to pay you back. How could Hellion Vivian listen to him? Her fingers moved slightly, wanting to resist. So naughty. Bailey Georgiou directly held her hand in his palm, then he pulled her hand and slowly, moved it towards that place. Hellion Vivian's face and ears were red, and even her breathing was a little hot. You let go. You want me to let go? How is that possible? When you opened the door today, you deliberately dressed like that, and you still want me to let go? Bellegaju laughed, and sweat slid down his handsome face, dripping onto her snow-white neck. Chapter 357. The old master handed over the bag in his hand. As he spoke, he also turned to look at Wei Wei. A few rays of light flashed through the depths of his eyes. Thinking about the things that His Highness wanted her to purchase, he was more or less somewhat astonished. However, she had just seen Miss Yoon in another room. Miss Yoon had come together with the second miss of the Hellion family. Miss Yoon also told her some things about His Highness. Miss Yoon asked her to help put in a good word in front of His Highness. His Highness seemed to have not forgotten that she left at will. But what was the situation now? Not only did His Highness personally bring the princess to the imperial family, but he also asked her to specially bring the custom-made things. She originally thought that those things were for Miss Yoon, but now it seemed that she was wrong. Hellion Vivian saw that the master had been looking at her, so she tilted her head and smiled. From the beginning, she felt that the identity of this master was not ordinary. Because there were definitely very few people who could make Bellegaju treat them with patience. But when facing this master, although His Highness was still very indifferent, compared to usual, he was not so angry. As if noticing Hellion Vivian's gaze, Bellegaju casually introduced her. This is Wet Nurse Shu from the palace. Hellion Vivian knew that generally in the imperial family, the wet nurse was even closer to the princes than their mother, but this master was a little too old. What nonsense are you thinking? Wet Nurse Shu took care of imperial father. Bellegaju glanced at Hellion Vivian indifferently. Hellion Vivian always felt that she was like a transparent person in front of His Highness. He knew what she was thinking. What about your Highness, wet nurse? I don't have a wet nurse. Bellegaju's voice was still calm and indifferent. Hellion Vivian did not understand. Doesn't every prince have a wet nurse? Bellegaju grunted and said in a light tone, Imperial Mother was busy fighting for favor at that time and forgot about me, so she didn't hire a wet nurse for me. Hellion Vivian did not expect such an answer. It was not that she forgot to hire a wet nurse. It was that she forgot about Bellegaju. To be forgotten by one's own mother, that feeling must be very uncomfortable, right? Hellion Vivian glanced at Beligaju. The side of the man's face still did not change, except that the smile at the corner of his mouth was tinged with a bit of mockery. She thought that he grew up in a pot of gold. But she never thought that there might be cruelty in the gold pot. In fact, after careful analysis, he was obsessed with cleanliness, perfect, and had a control over everything that was different from ordinary people. It could be seen that His Highness did not have a good childhood. Otherwise, he would not have formed such a character. On the surface, he looked very holy, but in fact, he was black to the bone. She was the same. When she was young, someone told her that she should be a gentle girl. That way, someone would know how to feel sorry for her and protect her. She also wanted to be protected. But in the end, she found that all of this was nonsense. She had to make herself stronger. Only by becoming stronger could she survive. Including when her stepmother poured dirty water on her and slandered her as a thief. She knew that in this world, no one would protect her. So she looked very approachable, but she was more cold-blooded than anyone else. To put it simply, she was selfish. She was so selfish that she would not completely trust anyone. She liked to leave a way out for everything. They were the same kind of people. In the eyes of the world, they must be bad to the bone. No, correction. She was bad to the bone. His Highness did a good job on the surface, although that man was the one who was really bad to the bone. Give me your hand. Beligaju took the exquisitely packaged bag. Hellion Vivian guessed that there should be something like jewelry in it. After all, rich people like to give these things, not to mention a rich person like His Highness. However, even someone as smart as Hellion Vivian could not completely guess Beligaju's thoughts. It was indeed something that bordered on jewelry. The workmanship was very exquisite. The texture of pure silver was indeed enchanting black. It could even emit a faint light under the sun. But, could someone come and tell her? Why did His Highness give her a cat collar? This was definitely a cat collar. In the 21st century, she had seen this thing in many pet shops. Although it did not look as thin as this one, it was not as beautiful as this one. There was basically no difference in shape. Hellion Vivian wanted to laugh again. Even 10,000 alpacas galloping past was not enough to describe her current mood. Right now, she just wanted to shake Beligaju awake and ask him, "What are you doing?" Did he think that after raising a pet, he was afraid that the pet would not be obedient and had to wear a collar? Did he need to write down his contact information and engrave the owner of the collar? As it turned out, Hellion Vivian had found the right clues and could still follow His Highness's thoughts. Because she found that on the pure silver collar, there was really a word engraved in a flamboyant style, Jew. Hellion Vivian, Beligaju would not give people a chance to refuse when he gave them a gift. He saw that she was staring at her palm for a long time, but had no intention of wearing it. His slender fingers directly reached out, opened the mysterious ice tungsten, and clasped it around Hellion Vivian's neck. Hellion Vivian's neck was beautiful, thin, and white. Now, with such a black color, even the fragile capillaries could be seen. Beligaju paused for a moment. Without hesitation, he leaned forward and was about to bite her, as if there was no one around. This time, Hellion Vivian did not let him succeed. She dodged and stood up. After meeting Wet Nurse Shu's surprised gaze, she smiled lazily and did not feel uncomfortable. It was just that there was an extra thing on her neck. Looking at it in the mirror, she looked quite pretty, a little like a dark angel. She had to admit that His Highness did have good taste. But no matter how good it was still a cat collar. Who would wear such a thing for people? We cats don't wear this either. Little White's cold voice came from the fantasy space. Unless it is a completely tamed spiritual beast, it will do whatever its master says. Yuan Ming raised the corner of his mouth. She is not far from being tamed. Let me think, it seems that there are still 4 more days. 4 more days until her dual cultivation day. You can shut up now. Hellion Wei Wei's tone was neither fast nor slow as she kicked these 2 guys out of her own consciousness. Then, she reached out and touched the collar on her neck. When she looked up, she saw 2 very familiar figures standing outside the courtyard. Those 2 people were not just anyone. One was Yun Biluo, and the other was Helian Jiawa, who always wanted to frame her. Although it was just a flash in front of her eyes, Helian Vivian was sure that the two figures that just appeared were those two people. Wasn't this a place where only the royal family could appear? How did Unveils come in? Chapter 358. Helian Vivian's fingers paused for a moment. What's wrong? When Beligaju followed her gaze, there was no one outside. Helian Vivian didn't think it was a big deal. She yawned lazily, nothing. As she spoke, she wanted to take off the collar on her neck. Bailey Jiaju pressed down on her hand. The corners of his mouth couldn't help but curve into a faint arc as he laughed in a low voice. He glanced at Helian Wei's neck with admiration. You really are suited to wear this. Helian Vivian. Should she say thank you? No matter what, she should take it off first. Looking at her actions, Beligaju smiled coldly. You better think carefully before you take it off. Otherwise, if I'm not happy, I might take Qingzhon away from you. Helian Vivian looked at him, amused. Qingzhon is yours. You care about her. Beligaju pulled her hand over and played with it in his palm. His voice was so indifferent that it hit the nail on the head. Helian Vivian's fingers moved the collar again. But, don't you feel awkward looking at it? Do I look like I'm wearing this? You don't. Beligaju frowned and looked at Helian Vivian as if he was looking at a disobedient pet. With helplessness and displeasure, he said, I wanted to make a chain for you directly. It would be best if you could lock it up, but you don't seem to like it. Helian Vivian. No one would like it. She really wanted to flip the table. Can't you give me a normal gift? This collar is not bad. Beligaju looked at Helian Vivian lightly. You like it very much. Helian Vivian's mouth twitched. When did I say that I like it? Didn't you look at yourself in the bronze mirror for a long time just now? Beligaju's matter-of-fact tone made Helian Vivian want to vomit blood. His Highness's inhuman ability to misunderstand was really impossible to communicate with. Helian Wei felt a sense of defeat. Beligaju patted her head. Don't be embarrassed. Helian Vivian just wanted to laugh at him. Then, she saw a delicate and beautiful light flash in front of her eyes. In the next moment, she saw a ring of the same color in his hand. The ring was shaped like a key, and it seemed to be of the same series as the collar on her neck. He calmly took the ring and put it on his little finger. It was obvious that he was the only one who could undo the collar on her neck. Helian Vivian. What the hell kind of territorial awareness is this? Wet Nurse Shu, who was standing next to them, couldn't help but smile at Helian Vivian. His Highness is really good to the Princess Consort. I'm afraid that this set of things won't be able to be made again in this world. Helian Wei believed this sentence, because mysterious ferrotungsten was very rare. To make such a delicate piece of mysterious ferrotungsten, it would cost a lot of money. But no matter how rare it was, a collar was still a collar. Yes, it was the best collar in the world. Helian Vivian thought as she looked in Beligaju's direction. She saw the man squinting his starry eyes under the light as he looked at her neck. A light flashed in his eyes, and his light-colored lips curved slightly, looking as elegant as jade. Forget it, it looks pretty on her anyway, so she'll just wear it. Helian Vivian had always been open-minded about this kind of thing, so she chatted with Wet Nurse Shu for a while with a smile on her face. The collar was actually not bad, at least it could cover the marks on her neck. Beligaju sat on the wooden chair and listened, with an ancient book in his hand and his chin on his left hand. He regained his usual elegance. He was dressed casually in a white and green robe. He had a tall and straight figure, a noble and elegant handsome face, and a low-key and profound temperament, but his expression was as calm as usual. Wet Nurse Shu also deliberately lowered her voice. She held the clothes in her hands and stopped talking about the workmanship. She felt a little relieved as she looked at Helian Wei and said, "There are some things that I don't know if I should say. If I've said something wrong, please forgive me, Princess Consort." Helian Vivian put the clothes aside. Is Master Shu going to talk about Unveils? Wet Nurse Shu's fingers paused, and then she laughed. Nothing can escape the eyes of the Princess Consort. Everyone said that Miss Helian was a real woman without beauty or brains, but in Wet Nurse Shu's opinion, Miss Helion was a person with good eyes and a clear heart. The corners of Helion Wei's mouth curled up. Master Shu, I'm not interested in her affairs. If you want to say something, you can tell Bailey Jiaoju directly. Wet Nurse Shu was stunned. She did not expect such an answer. She thought that an ungenerous woman would be angry. She also thought that the princess consort knew everything, so she wanted to find someone to discuss how to deal with Miss Yun. But now it seemed that Helion Vivian's reaction was neither of the two. Has the princess consort never thought about how to deal with Miss Yun? Wet Nurse Shu stayed in the palace for a long time. It could be said that she watched the royal family and Yun Biluo grow up. Helion Vivian smiled. Deal with her? Wet Nurse Shu quickly said, Princess consort, I don't mean anything else. His Highness has been a loner since he was a child, and there are few things that he wants. Previously, I thought that His Highness chose the princess consort because of the retired emperor's order, but now it seems that His Highness really cares about the princess consort. But I want to do you a favor. If one day His Highness wants to choose a secondary consort, please give Miss Yun a chance. Helion Vivian looked at Wet Nurse Shu and smiled. It seems that Wet Nurse Shu really takes care of Miss Yun as her own child. Wet Nurse Shu knew that her request was too much. Princess consort, don't be angry. I'm not angry. Helion Vivian smiled faintly. Every mother will do something that they don't want to do for their child. But I have the right to refuse this kind of thing. If Beligaju really wants to choose a secondary consort, I won't interfere with who he chooses. I won't speak for anyone, nor will I bully anyone. So, Wet Nurse Shu, you can rest assured about this. When the time came, she would leave directly. She wouldn't care about this kind of thing. Wet Nurse Shu's hands and feet stiffened unnaturally. I'm too much to ask the princess consort this kind of request. This time, Helion Vivian didn't deny it. Instead, she glanced at her. Since you think it's too much, don't mention it next time. I don't know if Beligaju will choose a secondary consort, but do you think he will allow what Wet Nurse Shu is doing now? The princess consort knows His Highness well. Wet Nurse Shu lowered her eyes with a smile on her face. She felt relieved and sad. Miss Yun is a little too wishful thinking. I've been with His Highness for so many years, but I've never seen him smile like that. Most of the time, he just sneered. Not to mention taking the princess consort to visit the imperial family like this. As servants, no matter how long we've been with His Highness, we always feel that accompanying the monarch is like accompanying a tiger. His Highness has probably noticed it, so no one can really get close to His Highness. From the beginning to the end, His Highness has always been alone. Chapter 359. Hearing Wet Nurse Shu's words, Helion Vivian put aside the clothes in her hands and subconsciously glanced at Beligaju, who was sitting outside. She found that his eyes were closed. His long eyelashes and noble and elegant handsome face were bathed in the light, making him look otherworldly. This kind of thing depends on his decision in the end. Helion Vivian retracted her eyes. Her voice was neither high nor low, as calm as water. Wet Nurse, if you feel sorry for others in the future, don't tell me. It's meaningless. Wet Nurse Shu paused and her eyes dimmed. However, she did not lose her sense of duty. She just bowed and continued to respectfully watch Helion Vivian choose. However, Yun Biluo did not expect that person to bring someone to the royal linen shop. She thought that she knew His Highness better than anyone else. But now, Yun Biluo looked at the white flowers in full bloom outside the window. Her clear eyes darkened and her fingers, which were hidden under her long sleeves, slightly clenched. However, Helion Jiawa sat beside her and asked indirectly, was that His Highness just now? Why did His Highness bring Helion Vivian to the royal linen shop? Yun Biluo knew why Helion Jiawa asked this question. Before they came to the royal linen shop, she had told Helion Jiawa the purpose of the shop. It was specially provided for the royal family. Whether it was robes or scarves, everything was custom-made. It was rare to find another cloth shop like this one in the capital city. Most importantly, only the royal family could enter the royal linen shop. But she was different. She was His Highness's personal maid and the only woman who was brought into the royal linen shop by His Highness. But now, she was not the only one. Furthermore, She was only able to enter back then because she was a servant girl. However, Hellion Vivian was different. She was really brought in by His Highness himself. Even His Highness was waiting for her to choose clothes. Even if it was for the sake of dealing with the retired emperor, His Highness seemed to have gone too far. At the thought of this, Yunbiluo could not help but cut her finger. The pain brought her back to reality and she smiled at the Hellion Jiaoer. You have to be realistic when you're acting. Are you saying that His Highness is acting? Hellion Jiaoer's eyes lit up. It's possible. I saw the retired emperor's shadow guards following them all the way. Yunbiluo answered absent-mindedly, but she still felt uneasy. It was probably because His Highness had not forgiven him. Ever since she appeared, she had never spoken to His Highness alone. Therefore, no one knew what he was thinking. However, there was one thing that Yunbiluo was very clear about. It could not go on like this. Jiaoer. Yunbiluo smiled gently and said in a pleasant voice, you can't go to the academy and you're locked up at home. Aren't you bored? Hellion Jiaoer was also good at pretending to be pitiful. She laughed at herself. How can I not be bored? But Sister Yun, you know that I annoyed His Highness because of Hellion Vivian last time. If it weren't for father and mother, I'm afraid I would have married that eunuch Huarian. Now that Hellion Vivian has someone backing her up, I don't know what she will do to me when she sees me. Miss Weiwei is indeed a little bold. Yunbiluo took a sip of tea as she spoke. Just the news that I've heard is enough to shock me. Hellion Jiaoer was smart enough to know that Yunbiluo was implying something. For the past few days, they had been talking about Hellion Vivian, that little bitch. Especially her father, who could not wait for that bitch to make a mistake and lose the right to inherit the family. If there was really any news at this time, it should be able to help her father. Sister Yun, do you know what happened? Hellion Jiaoer lowered her voice. Tell me, I won't tell anyone. Yunbiluo thought about it and said, I received news that Profound Heaven has been buying a lot of heat-resistant steel recently. These heat-resistant steel were stored by Hellion Vivian in a thatched house outside the capital city. Her actions are very secretive. Hellion Vivian should be doing something that she doesn't want anyone to know. This shouldn't be a big deal. Hellion Jiaoer frowned. She did not understand. Hasn't she been practicing martial arts? Yunbiluo glanced at her and said in a calm voice, it's not a big deal to make 1 or 10 armaments. But if you make too many armaments, the nature will change. Think about it. Will the retired emperor allow anyone to threaten the imperial power? After buying a lot of this steel and smelting it, won't it be turned into weapons in the end? Will the retired emperor be happy? Sister Yun knows so much. No wonder Hellion Vivian is so careful. Hellion Jiaoer usually only knew how to fight with the women in the inner residence. She thought that she was smart enough and that many people were fooled by her. Now that she heard Yunbiluo's words, she realized that they were just child's play when it came to matters related to the imperial court. One mistake and she would be beheaded. Thinking to this point, Hellion Jiaoer's eyes suddenly flashed with a malicious ray of light, making her shy and elegant little face become distorted. Hellion Jiaoer only had one thing on her mind. She must tell this news to her mother and let her think of an idea to take advantage of this opportunity to completely uproot that little bitch Hellion Vivian. However, at this moment, Su Yang Mo's expression turned sour because Hellion Guangyaro had looked at a little maid from the He family. She did not know what happened recently. Hellion Guangyaro seemed to be dissatisfied with her and warned her not to give him a hard time in public. Su Yang Mo also knew that she should not show it in front of outsiders. However, ever since her 2 beloved daughters were framed by that little bitch Hellion Vivian, every time she went out, she was more or less bothered by the way those women looked at her. The women in the He family also seemed to be hiding something from her. The more they were like this, the more Su Yang Mo wanted to re-enter that circle. As a result, she spoke more than before. This made Hellion Guangyaro feel somewhat embarrassed, so he coughed and pulled her to the side. What's wrong with you today? Can't you talk less after coming out? Hellion Guangyaro was angry because he felt that Su Yang Mo's behavior was a little degrading. Secondly, he was afraid that at this juncture, if Su Yang Mo really asked about his mistress outside, he would not be able to answer to the Su family. What did I do wrong? During this period of time, look at what our Jiaoer has become. Looking around, in this capital, only the He family's young master is suitable for her. If she can marry into the He family, then all those things in the past can be restarted. Su Yang Mo had never lived such a life. Everywhere she went, people looked at her strangely. She desperately needed something to prove herself, so even her words and actions were a little ingratiating. She could not see it, but she felt that it was right. Chapter 360. Helian Guang Yarrow was irritated to see her like this. Especially when his wife greeted others warmly, he would feel embarrassed. Initially, when he married Su Yang Mo, some people in the capital looked down on him. Later on, when his power gradually increased, people began to forget about this matter. No matter how good the Su family was, it could not be compared to the Helian family, which was a real aristocratic family. Some temperaments required time to develop. In the past, he thought that Su Yang Mo was the kind of woman that men needed the most. She was gentle and knew what expression to show at the right time. But after all, she was just a pretty girl from a humble family. This kind of pretty girl from a humble family was indeed pitiful when she was young. But now, it was still the same. Helian Guang Yarrow could not stand it anymore. He thought of the lovely girl he had outside and felt that Su Yang Mo was clingy. Su Yang Mo did not want to argue with Helian Guang Yarrow outside. She knew that this woman's biggest taboo was to argue with a man in public. Her tone softened subconsciously. "Old master, I am anxious because of Jiao. Didn't I advise you to wait until I get the right to inherit the Helian family? It won't be too late for you to do these things then." Helian Guang Yarrow's attitude was mixed with annoyance. Su Yang Mo was naturally unhappy. Helian Guang Yarrow glanced at her again and said, "You go back and think about it first. When you've made up your mind, you can come out again." As he spoke, he called for the servant who was following at the side, "Send Madam back." "Yes." The servant lowered his eyes and walked to Su Yang Mo respectfully. "Madam, let's go back first." Su Yang Mo looked at Helian Guang Yarrow's back. Her lowered eyes flashed with a trace of resentment. Her hands clenched a little, but she had to follow the servant back first. Helian Jiao was waiting in the side room. Looking at Su Yang Mo's gloomy expression, she was not sure what had happened. She had just mentioned Helian Vivian. Su Yang Mo threw the tea in her hand and said, "Don't mention that little bastard's name in front of me." The three of them had fallen to this state because of that little bastard. She couldn't wait to strangle that little bastard to death. "Mother, listen to me. This time, we will make sure that little bitch will never be able to make a comeback." Helian Jiao whispered into Su Yang Mo's ear and told her everything that had happened. Su Yang Mo's eyes lit up when she heard that. She thought for a while and ordered the servant, "Go to the Ministry of Official Personnel Affairs and get Lord Li Meng here." Li Meng was a distant relative of the Su family in Jiangnan. He had just been transferred to the capital, and his promotion depended on the Su family's care. Prime Minister Su had arranged for him to work in the Ministry of Civil Affairs, so that the Su family could use him one day. Of course, Su Yang Mo would not let go of this opportunity. When it was time to order people around, she would order them around. After Li Ji received the news from the servant, he immediately came to the general's residence. In the past, he had helped Madame Su with a lot of things. In the past, when those rumors about the eldest daughter of the Helian family were spread, it was all him who helped infiltrate the officialdom. When those officials heard about it, they naturally would not allow their sons to marry such an ugly hedonistic girl into the residence. Moreover, it was the Murong residence. That was why Helian Vivian was divorced, and it was partly because of him. However, after thinking about it for a long time, he still could not understand why this Helian Vivian suddenly became the third princess consort. Later on, he heard that it was because the third prince wanted to deal with the retired emperor. However, even if it was to deal with the retired emperor, he should have married that attractive cousin of his. Why did he choose that ugly girl? He muttered in his heart, but did not dare to ask. He only listened attentively to Su Yang Mo's instructions. "Go and investigate this place." Su Yang Mo gave him an address. Li Ji looked at the address written on the rice paper. It was just a village outside the capital, so he did not pay much attention to it. Go and investigate this place tonight. If you find any weapons, bring them back to the Yamen. Su Yang Mo took a sip and said calmly, "This is like a pie falling from the sky for you." A big deal for a pie falling from the sky. Li Ji did not understand. I hope Madame Su can give me some pointers. Mass production of weapons outside the city, what are their intentions? Su Yang Mo laughed. As long as you use the excuse of catching rebels and thieves, you can seize the weapons and catch the people. Think about it, won't you have done a great service? After hearing that, Li Ji's eyes lit up. But I don't know who has the guts to mass-produce weapons. Who else could it be? Su Yang Mo laughed coldly. Does she think that she can do whatever she wants now that she's a princess consort? She started the martial arts world and no one really cares about her. However, she's too wild and never knows how to be satisfied. She's definitely up to no good by mass-producing weapons in such a secretive manner. Li Ji gasped and hesitated. It's the third princess consort's. It's hers, so what? Su Yang Mo's face darkened and she looked at Li Ji coldly. Then, she blew on her nails and laughed. It seems that I've been worrying too much. With such a great service, the first thing I thought of was my relatives. If you don't dare to do it, then let's forget about it. It's not like the Ministry of War can't get the news. Li Ji wiped his sweat and hurriedly said, Don't. This official was too slow to react. However, the third prince. In the end, the one he didn't dare to provoke was that godlike man. Everyone in the capital knows why the royal family married that girl. Do you think the royal family will care about that girl after such a thing happened? Su Yang Mo took another sip of tea. Since ancient times, only the imperial court has the right to mass-produce such a large number of weapons to prevent people from secretly raising an army and plotting to usurp the throne. If the royal family protects Hellion Vivian when the time comes, then they will miss out even more. Think about it, which emperor would allow his son to have so many weapons in private? The royal family is so smart, they can't wait to hide in this kind of situation. Why would they speak up for Hellion Vivian? Moreover, when the prince reaches the age of concubine, with Jiao Er's looks, she will definitely stand out at that time. Think about it carefully, whether you want to do it or not. Li Ji had always been a scheming person. Although his work ability was not very good, his mind was flexible and he could always take the opportunity to climb up. It could be said that for so many years, he had completely relied on this distant aunt of his in the capital. And the reason why his aunt lived so comfortably was mostly because her daughter was very famous in the entire capital. Although there were some problems now, with his aunt's means, he believed that it would not take long to solve it. Chapter 361. Moreover, how could the young lady of the Hellion family be compared to an ugly girl who was banished from the family? Li Meng had a plan and immediately agreed to Su Yang Mo's words. I'll go back now and send someone to keep an eye on her. He did not believe that he could not catch Hellion Vivian by keeping an eye on her all the time. Li Meng's status was low and he could not mix in the real circle of the capital. Naturally, he did not know that the boss of Profound Heaven did not rely on luck. He only thought that Hellion Vivian was an inexperienced person. He could not wait to get hold of Hellion Vivian's weakness and drag her down. He could use this opportunity to gain merit and curry favor with Hellion Guangyao. As far as he knew, the Hellion family would have a clan meeting soon and the successor would be announced at the meeting. Hellion Guangyao could not wait to see what would happen to Hellion Vivian. If he did well this time, not only would he be able to gain favor with Madame Su, but he would also be able to get along with Hellion Guangyao. There would be a great chance for him to be promoted and rich in the future. Li Meng was calculating in his heart and felt that this was a profitable business. He immediately raised his spirits and transferred 500 people from the Yamen on the same day. After receiving the news that Li Meng had transferred people, the resentment that Su Yang Mo had been suppressing for the past few days was finally appeased. She thought insidiously that this time, even if she could not take that little bastard's life, she would smash Profound Heaven's hideout into smithereens. Noon. The sun was shining brightly. Cicadas chirped continuously. The White Academy also gave the students 2 days off because it was too hot. Tu Sufeng did not mention the real reason, but Hellion Vivian knew that it was because the academy was not as peaceful as before. She was now part of the battle spirit forces, and her daily mission was to secretly search for the existence of demons in the academy. It seemed that Murong Hongtu's possession was very important to Tu Sufeng. However, Hellion Vivian felt that Tu Sufeng seemed to be more worried about what would happen in the academy. It was probably because Beligaju and Little Seven were here. War Dragon Empire's two most outstanding princes, and one of them was the heir apparent appointed by the retired emperor. Therefore, the search on the academy's side naturally became stricter. As usual, Hellion Vivian was in the same group as Little Seven. Little Baldy was very serious when he did his work. He had a tiger's head and tiger's face as he held a wooden stick and inspected every corner of the academy. He was very dedicated to his work. Of course, the prerequisite was that he couldn't scavenge all the food in every place he went. "Are you full?" Hellion Vivian asked him with a smile. Little Baldy rubbed his little belly and said seriously, "That meal just now didn't taste good." "Are you talking about the lotus leaf rice that you snatched from the headmaster?" Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. The little one nodded, his brows furrowed like a little caterpillar. It was probably because he had eaten something bad that made him feel that the world was not a good place anymore. Hellion Vivian looked at his expression and smiled. "If it's not delicious, why did you finish it all?" "The headmaster said that we can't waste food." The little one straightened the wooden stick in his hand, looking very mighty and domineering. Hellion Vivian glanced at the little one. She didn't understand where the food he usually ate went. Then, she looked at the direction of the sun and gently jumped down from the shade of the white flower tree. Then, she tidied up her clothes and said, "I'm going somewhere. Don't run around and go straight to the dean, okay? Third sister-in-law, are you going to look for third brother?" Little Baldy took a bite of the meat bun he stole and his cheeks puffed up. Hellion Vivian said, "No, I'm going out of the city to do something. Then I'll go with the 3 ships." The little one continued to puff up his cheeks, but his tone was very serious. "Third brother said that I should protect you when he's not around." Hellion Wei was speechless. Since when did she have to be protected by a 4-year-old child? However, it was good to bring little Chi along. He could help her carry some things. Hellion Vivian seemed to have thought of something and smiled. "Are you going to practice martial arts later?" "Yes." The little one paced forward with a dignified look. "I can practice martial arts with you." Hellion Vivian felt that she shouldn't bully a child, so she told him what she wanted to ask for his help later. "When we get to that place, help me carry some things, just like how the headmaster asked you to carry stones to practice martial arts. Then, I'll treat you to some spiced beef. What do you think?" Spiced beef. The little one's 2 canine teeth immediately lit up. However, third brother said that as a successful man must be expressionless. Especially for a successful man, he must be able to conceal his emotions without showing his emotions. Therefore, he must control himself. Yes, he must control himself. The little one clenched his fists and tried hard to suppress the corners of his mouth. Finally, he turned his head and asked Hellion Vivian, "Third sister-in-law, can I have 1 more meat bun?" "Yes, you can have 3. The more Hellion Vivian looked at the little one in front of her, the cuter she found him. Especially when he had to pretend to be cool even though he wanted to eat it. Little did he know that his twitching little ears had betrayed him. She wondered if His Highness was also like this when he was young. However, little Chi's little handsome face was really handsome, especially when he exuded a punk vibe that said, "I'm not to be trifled with. I'll beat up anyone who talks to me." It was such a contrast. Just like that, Hellion Vivian carried the little one and went out of the city in a carriage. The stronghold was set there because it was closer to the hidden army. However, no one knew about this. The retired emperor ordered her to make this batch of weapons in a hurry. During the rush period, it was requested to be as secretive as possible. Now that the weapons were made, the hidden army only needed the heavy machine guns. However, they were almost done. Hellion Vivian went there this time mainly to adjust the performance of the heavy machine guns. Another hour passed. In front of her was a huge courtyard surrounded by a brick wall. Standing outside the courtyard, She could hear the sound of metal clashing inside. This time, Helion Wei Wei used the most experienced master craftsman in the capital. Don't be fooled by their age, their craftsmanship was very good. When the craftsmen saw that Helion Vivian had brought a little one, they were very happy. They touched him and looked at him. Little seventh prince had always been cold, but he never rejected the kindness. He ate whatever was given to him. After a while, he went to help the craftsmen move the things. At first, the craftsmen were afraid that he would hit his hand. However, when they turned around, they saw the little one carrying a stack of spears on his shoulder. A stack. The craftsmen were collectively stunned. They rubbed their eyes. Then, they saw the little one squatting down and carrying another stack of spears. There must be something wrong with their eyes today. Just as they were thinking about this, they suddenly heard a commotion outside. It sounded like many people had suddenly barged in. With a bang, the wooden door was pushed open. Chapter 362. The craftsmen had no idea what was going on. They put down their tools and looked behind them in shock. Li Meng had barged in with the people from the Ministry of Official Personnel Affairs. Everyone who was forging in the courtyard was captured and squatted in a corner. They would not have known if they had not captured them, but they had captured more than 20 workers. Li Meng looked at the scene in the courtyard excitedly. There were swords and steel everywhere. The people inside seemed to be loading carts, as if they were going to transport these weapons somewhere. The evidence was irrefutable. Just like what Madame Su said, even if Helion Vivian had the third prince's support, the other party would not dare to say anything. How could a person like third prince, for the sake of Wei Wei, bear the crime of plotting a rebellion? When the time came, he would definitely not interfere. As long as the third prince did not interfere, there was nothing that he could not do. Put all these people in jail, Li Meng commanded proudly. He let the people from the Ministry of Official Personnel Affairs control the craftsmen and led a group of guards into the courtyard. They took out all the weapons and piled them up in the courtyard. In a short while, they had piled up into a small hill. This made him even more certain that he had caught Helion Vivian's weakness. They had only searched one room and they had found so many weapons. If they searched all the rooms in the backyard, who knew how many more things they would find? Li Meng guessed in his heart that if this was not a rebellion, then what was it? He snorted and threw back the sword in his hand. He said disdainfully, "Confiscate all of them." Li Meng led his men to the backyard. The commotion grew bigger and bigger. Soon, they found the courtyard where the little seventh prince was staying. The little bald head was practicing seriously. When he saw the soldiers suddenly barging in, his big tiger eyes narrowed into a straight line, revealing an unprecedented sense of danger. Li Meng was only a small official in the Ministry of Official Personnel Affairs. He did not know the little seventh prince at all. Even Su Yang Mo had only seen the little bald head's back at the wedding, let alone him. Everyone knew that the retired emperor doted on his two grandsons the most. The older one was the third prince, and the younger one was ranked seventh. They were not to be trifled with. In Nangong Lai's words, it was like a little tiger that would bite anyone it caught. Whether it was inside or outside the imperial palace, no one had ever dared to provoke the young king of hell. He was different from the third prince. After all, the third prince was already in charge of some matters in the imperial court. Before doing anything, he had to see if this matter was beneficial to the retired emperor. As for the little seventh prince, he was a typical example of biting to death whoever provoked him. After he was done, the retired emperor could not bear to punish such a young grandson, so he was punished to face the wall and reflect on his mistakes. Every time the little seventh prince reflected on his mistakes, his means of revenge would become even more vicious. That was why all the high-ranking ministers, such as Helion Guang Yarrow and Prime Minister Su, had to avoid the little seventh prince whenever they saw him. Li Meng did not know about these things. He glanced at the little one's dirty robes and bald head. Instinctively, he thought that he was just a poor kid brought in by some master. He did not take Little Seven seriously at all. However, Little Seven was born in the imperial family. When he encountered such a situation, his whole body immediately showed his nobility. Who allowed you to come in? Get out. It was just a few simple words, but it made people feel oppressed. This prompted Li Meng to look at Little Seven and snorted disdainfully. Little country bumpkin, move away. As he spoke, he wanted to reach out and push him away. Although Master Wang, who was standing at the side, did not know what Little Seven was, he was brought in by the princess consort, so he must be very precious. In addition, this group of masters really liked Little Seven, so he immediately stood in front of Little Seven and calmly looked at Li Meng. Sir, if there's anything, we can talk about it properly. How can you just come in and grab people and steal things? Li Meng sneered. You know very well what this courtyard is for. Mass production of weapons. Do you know that this is a crime? If you know what's good for you, move away. Otherwise, I'll kill you right now. Master Wang's face turned pale. He hugged Little Seven and stood aside. He was really worried that the swords had no eyes and would hurt the people brought by the princess consort. He had been in Wei Zi world for so many days and had seen many officials, but he had never seen one like this. He was so angry that he could not speak. Little Seven's little face completely darkened. He lowered his head and did not know what to do. The masters all protected Little Seven and did not let the soldiers touch the child. At this moment, they only hoped that the child would be fine. Everything else could be done again. The princess consort was still at the back of the mountain, discussing official business. Someone had already gone to report. They believed that as long as the princess consort was here, this group of people would all be finished. Sir, we found a cave in the back of the courtyard. It seems to be the warehouse where they hide the weapons. Should we go? Li Meng was excited when he heard this. He got up and was about to go over. Master Wang still remembered that the princess consort had ordered that no one was to go to the cave in the back of the mountain, so he desperately blocked Li Meng's way. Li Meng kicked Master Wang to the ground, snatched the blacksmithing tools from his hands and threw them to the ground. He said fiercely, "You still dare to block me, huh? You want to take advantage of the loophole to make money? Let me tell you, there's no way. No matter who you work for, no matter how powerful your background is, I will still catch you. Who asked you to provoke someone you shouldn't provoke and make such a batch of weapons? I want to know if I've offended someone I shouldn't have." In the midst of the commotion, Helian Wei very slowly walked out from the backyard. Her pair of eyes carried a chilling coldness that made people tremble. Her long sleeves were like wings as she lightly floated in midair. Her eyes swept over the surrounding environment. Steel was thrown everywhere, and Master Wang was clutching his lower abdomen. As well as Little Seven, whose eyes had turned red and whose little fists were clenched so tightly that creaking sounds could be heard. When he stepped back just now, Little Seven's clothes were dirty. His originally handsome face now looked like he had been wronged. Helian Vivian's face immediately darkened. She took a deep breath and suppressed the anger in her heart, but her eyes were colder than ever. Standing beside Helian Vivian was Da Xiong of the Hidden Army. Seeing that his young master's courtyard was smashed, his eyes widened. He bent down and whispered in Helian Vivian's ear, "Young master, I will go back now and bring a few brothers to beat this bunch of ignorant people to death." "No need." Helian Vivian's thin lips curled up, and she was full of murderous intent. "This place is so secretive, but someone still followed the vine to find the melon. Obviously, someone doesn't like me. I don't believe that a small rank 5 from the Ministry of Personnel would have such gut. There must be someone behind him. Heh, they dare to bully people in my, Helian Wei's, territory. Didn't they want to make a scene? Then let's make it bigger. I want to drag all of them out. Let him search." Chapter 363. Da Xiong was confused, but he couldn't help but admire his young master's oppressive aura. Li Meng had never seen Helian Vivian before. He had only heard of her reputation in the capital. Now that he had seen her, he was even more certain of his conjecture. How could such a dark woman be compared to his fairy-like cousin? She was just an ugly woman. Without hesitation, he met Helian Vivian's gaze. With a mocking smile, he said, "Third princess consort, don't blame this official for being rude. This official was ordered to investigate this case. I advise third princess consort to be tactful. These weapons are evidence of your crimes. Hellion Vivian sneered in her heart. She didn't say anything, but reached out to stop Xiao Qi. Li Meng saw that she didn't say anything and thought that she was guilty. His expression became even more smug. He waved his hand and said, "Come, put these people in chains and bring them back to the Yamen." "Yes." 2 soldiers answered. They wanted to go forward and pull the little one up. Xiao Qi's expression was cold. He waved the wooden stick in his hand, but he didn't hit anyone. Those officers who wanted to get close to him were forced to take a step back. Their internal organs were in unbearable pain. In an instant, the 2 soldiers' expressions changed. They lay on the ground, cold sweat pouring down their foreheads. "Get more people here. You can't even deal with a child. You're really useless," Li Meng said fiercely. He didn't believe that this poor child could be so powerful. He would kill him with one stab. That soldier adjusted his official cap and hurriedly replied, "Yes." "Wait." Hellion Vivian smiled at this moment. Her evil aura was cold. "No need to call for more people. We'll follow you to the Yamen." For a moment, everyone wondered if there was something wrong with their ears. What was the princess consort thinking? Da Xiong didn't understand either. His mouth was wide open. If he saw their young master being taken away, he would be laughed at by his brothers. But there were only a few hundred Lulu. He could beat them all by himself. Was it his imagination? Why did he feel that the young master was deliberately going along with the other party today? No one could understand why Hellion Vivian would do such a thing. But the little 7th prince, who was born in the palace, knew clearly. If he went to prison and his imperial grandfather found out, none of these people would be able to escape. Grandpa Emperor might not be so angry after a few simple checks. But if the commotion was too big, then it would be a different story. Humph. She dared to disturb his training and bully third sister-in-law. See if third brother doesn't skin these people alive when he comes. However, he did not know if there was any food in the prison. He was so angry with these people that he was hungry. It was very unlucky. As Little Seven thought about it, he put away the wooden stick in his hand and stood behind Hellion Vivian with a solemn expression. That kind of aura made the soldiers tremble when they put the handcuffs on him. How was this a child? This was clearly a tiger. It was as if it could bite him if he wasn't careful. Why did official Li let them catch this kind of child? The soldiers were suffering unspeakably, but Li Ji did not know anything. From the beginning, he thought that Little Seven was just a wild child in this village. No matter how powerful he was, he only knew some martial arts. How could he think of the royal family? However, the moment he brought Little Seven back to the Yamen, Beligaju received the news. Shadow knelt on one knee in the palace and told him about how the little 7th prince was bullied. Nangong Lai laughed. "Little Seven can be bullied? Which blind fool did that?" Beligaju put down the letters in his hand and said slowly, "Who bullied him? Let Little Seven take his life." And the third princess consort. Shadow thought for a while and told him everything in detail, including the incident where Hellion Wei Wei was taken away. He watched as his master's face slowly darkened, and in the end, his voice went silent. Bailey Jiaoju still maintained his previous sitting posture, indolent yet noble. Only, that pair of eyes that were as indifferent as ice suddenly soared with a touch of stifling depth. Then, there was a cracking sound. The luminous pearl on the desk cracked into a deep crack. And Ying suddenly held his breath. He knew that this time, His Highness was really angry. Beligaju stood up, his eyes were like ice pools. The usual elegance had now turned into the most frightening evil aura. It was a cold smile that made people shiver from the bottom of their hearts, as if it could seep into the bones of others. Go and investigate. No matter who they are, as long as they are related to this matter, bring them all to me. Shadow respectfully answered and immediately left. This time, the person who made a move on the princess consort had touched his master's reverse scale. The other party was indeed a fool. Of all people to arrest, they just had to arrest the princess consort and the little 7th prince together. Even if the 3rd prince didn't say anything, The retired emperor would probably feel very distressed. Beligaju had always been ruthless, but he didn't think that there was anyone who could really deal with Hellion Vivian. After thinking about it for a while, he understood what was going on. He then ordered the servant beside him to send the news directly to the retired emperor. Nangong Lai followed beside him with an evil smile. This is really a beautiful plan. Her making weapons was ordered by Imperial Grandfather, and I was also involved. Beligaju's few words were enough to show that the person who made trouble this time was simply courting death. Clang! The iron door made a hollow and long sound. In the gloomy dungeon, Hellion Vivian and the little seventh prince were locked in the same cell. Li Meng looked at them complacently, then ordered 2 jailers to keep a close watch on them and wait for him to come back for interrogation. The little seventh prince snorted twice. When third brother comes, he will definitely be dead. Yes. Hellion Vivian laughed. That man definitely wouldn't allow anyone to bully the little seventh prince. Previously, when he saw someone badmouth the little seventh prince, his eyes could kill. The little bald head rubbed his stomach and was still a little indignant. Master Wang originally said that he would make preserved vegetables and meat for me to eat, but in the end, there is nothing. You helped third sister-in-law do a lot of things today. When we go out later, third sister-in-law will take you to the VIP restaurant to eat. Hellion Vivian picked up the little one and wiped the dirt on his face. The little bald head tilted his face. Third sister-in-law, don't wipe it. If you wipe it, Imperial Grandfather won't see me as pitiful. He will definitely think that I am the one who hit others and not the other way around. I usually like to hit people too much. Hellion Vivian. You also know that you are famous for loving to fight. As the two of them were talking, a light suddenly lit up in the dark prison cell. Tap, tap, tap. The sound of footsteps coming from afar was extremely messy, enough to tell that the person who came was very anxious. Quickly open the cell for me. Chapter 364. It was official Li, who was in charge of the entire Ministry of Appointments. Right now, he couldn't find any of his usual high status and authority. He was constantly wiping the sweat on his forehead with a handkerchief. The jailers didn't know why official Li was so anxious. They could only lower their heads and quickly unlock the iron lock. Official Li hurriedly entered the prison cell and bowed deeply to the 2 people who were still chatting. This humble official didn't recognize Mount Tai and offended the 2 of you. Now that the misunderstanding has been resolved, the 2 of you can leave the prison. Hellion Vivian smiled but didn't say anything. Little Seven nestled in Hellion Vivian's arms and didn't have any intention of moving. It seemed that he had made up his mind that if his imperial grandfather didn't come personally, he wouldn't leave this prison cell today. Official Li saw that the 2 of them didn't move and became even more anxious. His legs couldn't help but start to tremble. He looked at Hellion Vivian with a pleading gaze. Miss Hellion, no, Princess Consort, this matter really has nothing to do with this humble official. This humble official also doesn't know why the people below were so blind and captured the 2 of you. Please help this humble official persuade the 7th prince. Ah, I thought official Li didn't know who Little Seven and I were. The moment you came in, you called us too. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly. Official Li was speechless. He anxiously paced back and forth like a headless fly. He was so anxious that he was about to cry. At this moment, a clear announcement came from outside the prison cell. The retired emperor has arrived. A bright yellow figure walked over from afar. His steps were steady and dignified, revealing a noble and graceful aura. Official Li's expression changed. He pressed his head and quickly kowtowed. He shouted, "This humble official respectfully welcomes the emperor's arrival. Long live the emperor!" Eunuch's son, who was beside the retired emperor, didn't even look at him and directly walked past. The retired emperor, who was such a person who cared about his appearance, walked away with messy hair. He lowered his head and saw that his precious grandson's face was black and his arm seemed to be scraped. This was simply like stabbing his heart with a knife. Eunuch's son immediately cried out in pain. His eyes immediately filled with tears. Who exactly is this person who doesn't want to live? 7th prince, where does your body hurt? Just tell this old servant, her? Look at what those people did. In any case, they were still in the capital. If they were caught and beaten in a more remote place, wouldn't they have killed someone? The seventh prince is still a child, how could they do that? Little Baldy pouted and raised his head to look at the retired emperor. Imperial grandfather, I didn't hit anyone this time. I was just practicing martial arts with third sister-in-law. That group of people rushed in and said that third sister-in-law and I had offended someone we shouldn't have. The retired emperor's face was ashen. He wished he could drag all of them down and behead them. He reached out and carried the little one over. He patted Xiao Qi's back and roared at official Li, who was kneeling behind him, who is the one who captured him? Investigate immediately. If you can't find out, I'll kill you directly. Mr. Li was so scared that he trembled and immediately rushed out. When he rushed to the door, he saw Beligaju walking in. Third, royal family. Official Li curled his fingers and instinctively wanted to run away. Bailey Jiaoju slowly walked over, his peach blossom eyes seemed to be sprinkled with ice dregs, so cold that it couldn't help but cause a chill to surface. It was still that spirited and handsome face, but the expression was so sinister and malicious, the depths of his eyes were even more indifferent. Move quickly, the side effects must be small, don't scare the snake, and don't think about catching a scapegoat. If this highness finds out that you've communicated with someone, your Li family's 138 people can forget about living, understand? When official Li heard this, he knew that there was something behind this matter. The royal family wanted to investigate thoroughly. He immediately wiped away his cold sweat and hurriedly said, I understand, this official understand. How would this official dare to leak information to others? Your Highness, rest assured, this official will definitely handle this matter well. However, he really didn't know who did this. Which unlucky bastard did this and left him to clean up this mess that couldn't be cleaned up? Imperial grandfather, fortunately, third sister-in-law is here. In the prison cell, little bald head covered his small face and was full of tiger spirit. If it wasn't for third sister-in-law, I would have been bullied badly. Nangong Lai came in behind Beligaju. When he heard the little one's words, his expression couldn't help but be a little twisted. He looked sideways and asked Beligaju, who was standing at the side, do you believe that this little brat will be bullied? Why not? Beligaju looked at him indifferently and said slowly, my seventh brother is still a child. Nangong Lai. Yes, that's right, little seven is indeed a child, but this child can fight magical beasts with his bare hand. In this world, except for you, the royal family, who can bully him, you are indeed brothers. Nangong Lai smiled evilly. They were all black-hearted people who ate people without spitting out the bones. He still admired the person who dared to pluck the fur from the tiger. He really didn't know anything about life and death. The older the retired emperor was, the more he loved his grandson. This group of people knew that the third prince had a cold personality since he was young. No matter how close the retired emperor was, he had a limit. But the little seventh prince was different. Except for his love of beating people, he was basically a good-natured boy. If the retired emperor wasn't afraid that he would be framed in the palace, he wouldn't be willing to send him to the White Academy to raise him. She had been well taken care of and had never suffered a single grievance. Suddenly, she was caught and thrown into prison. It would be strange if the retired emperor wasn't angry. Besides, this batch of weapons was secretly made by Hellion Vivian. Yesterday, he just received the news that it was almost completed. Today, he heard the news that someone was caught. Who the hell is so daring? The retired emperor turned his head and said to Beligaju, Arju, go and investigate. Whoever you find, arrest him for me. Don't be considerate. Okay. Bailey Jiaoju's voice was faint as he hummed in agreement, but his eyes were on Hellion Wei's body. After confirming that she did not have any wounds, that pair of eyes could be considered to be much gentler. Come over. Hellion Vivian naturally wouldn't reject him in front of the retired emperor. Moreover, the retired emperor had appeared right after she and little seventh prince were locked in prison. This man must have some tricks up his sleeve. It seemed that she and his highness had a tacit understanding when it came to dealing with others. While the entire prison was set, Li Meng was proudly taking credit in the general's residence. Li Meng was rarely invited into the inner hall, but this time was an exception. Su Yang Mo sent him to work this time to wait for his results. If he really found out something, that little bitch would never be able to make a comeback. Li Meng held a cup of good tea that he rarely drank and talked about what he had done today. His words were full of joy from helping Madame Su vent her anger. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.